Chapter 1462. Retreat. Balshan lowered her body and bellowed. Sure, fire ahead. Understood. Aiming. Don't aim. Just shoot at will. She pulled the bolt of her gun and fired at the monster. She did not even have the time to adjust her resonance stone. As the vehicle reversed, the 75mm short-barreled cannon finally spat out a burst of fire. The distance of less than 300 meters was covered in an instant. At the same time Sure fired, a column of smoke rose in front of the monster. It looked like another empty shot, but amidst the billowing smoke and dust, the three of them caught sight of broken limbs falling from the sky. No matter how small the barrel of the field artillery on the tank was, it was still an artillery piece. It could not be compared to a machine gun. The billowing dust also revealed the silhouette of the blade beasts. Balshan did a rough count, and found that there were at least 10 of them. This monster is bringing along a bunch of blade beasts? Bei reacted at this moment. That's right. I'm afraid it's the Sky Sea Realm's nest mother, in the manual. Balshan said in a deep voice. But compared to the hand-drawn model, there were many differences on this monster, as though it was a mutated relative. Retreating to the corner of the street, the other two convoys had clearly noticed the commotion they had caused. Before Balshan could speak, Amy had already shouted. The other tank squad is less than 2 streets west of us. We will meet them in 5 minutes. No, don't go. It's too late. Balshan yelled. Let the soldiers enter the fortress. Fight on the spot? There's more than one enemy. The captain of Convoy 17, Hero, revealed a look of surprise. It's precisely because there's more than one that we can't retreat. Despite the urgency of the situation, Balshan's mind was abnormally clear. It was impossible to stop more than 10 blade beasts with just 3 tanks. If they were to charge into the formation of the soldiers, it would be an irreversible loss. But they were different. Just as Isabella had said, these armored weapons were born with both offense and defense. Even if they were surrounded by the enemy, it did not mean that the outcome of the battle was decided. Hero, please seal the entrance. Only then will we be able to fight to our heart's content. The latter turned to look at the rusted and deformed metal door of the fortress, and instantly understood her intentions. Got it. Aimi, come with me. Okay. Even though Baldy wasn't the commander of the team, Amy subconsciously nodded. Leader, you're really cool, Shell said with admiration. Wait until everyone returns safe and sound before you start sucking up to him. Balshan grinned. Lin Sanjia knew that it was not a good idea to think like this, but she could not help herself. She did not hate Kasumi, but the time she spent with Kasumi in developing the land was not worth mentioning. She could not lie to herself. When she was being hunted by the church, she had thought that a stable life was her goal, but now it seemed that she was more suited for the smoke-filled battlefield. Perhaps this was the reason why she had awakened as a combat witch? When all the soldiers entered the fortress, Convoy 17 increased the power to the maximum and reversed at full speed towards the door. With a loud bang, the body of the tank was directly embedded into the wall, becoming a fixed bunker. As such, the Sky Sea Realm's invisible assassins would no longer be able to cross the steel defense line and attack the relatively weaker soldiers. At this moment, the blade beasts had traversed the distance of several hundred meters and appeared at the corner of the street. Although Balshan was unable to see them directly, the magic lines of the sigil of resonance clearly marked out the enemy's location. Full speed ahead, don't stop. She roared and entered the turret, locking the top of the exit. This war machine did not only rely on cannons and machine guns to kill its enemies. As long as it maintained a certain speed, it would be lethal by itself. When Bei stepped on the gas pedal with all his might, Balshan saw a magic line suddenly fly up through the driver's mirror. Wait a minute, this monster can actually fly? That's not right. She quickly reacted. It was the enemy's long-distance pounce. She could not help but grip the armrest tightly as her body tensed up. Whether she lived or died would depend on the craftsmanship of Neverwinter's craftsmen. Clang! The enemy slammed heavily onto the roof of the car. The huge impact even caused a small dent to appear on the roof, and the reverberating muffled sound made the three's eardrums numb. Even so, the car only trembled violently, and there was no sign of it stopping. Balshan immediately felt reassured. I'll be in charge of aiming, she ordered as she shook the turret. All you have to do is to pull the trigger. What about me? Bei asked. The destination is that monster. As long as you don't crash into the wall, you can drive however you want. Balshan completely ignored the pouncing enemy. She knew that her companions would deal with it. If that flesh monster was really a nest mother, it had to be eliminated first. Otherwise, the number of blade beasts on the plains would only increase. Amidst the roar of the Rubik's Cube, the tank emitted white smoke as it charged into the horde of blade beasts. The coaxial machine gun spat out bullets in a frenzy, and the blade beasts did not possess the barrier ability of a senior demon. Every bullet could cause actual damage, and if it hit a vital spot, the target would instantly fall to the ground. Even if they didn't die, what awaited them would be steel tracks. The blade beasts could only pierce through the steel plates of the tank when their front claws emitted blue light. However, this would also expose them to the machine gun's range of fire. Most of the bullets from Convoy 9 landed on the left and right of the vehicle in front. Without needing to worry about accidentally injuring them, Amy clearly used Balshan, who was in the lead, as a calibration target. Very quickly, the two tanks carved out a bloody path from the enemy. After 4 ruts, there was a pile of badly mutilated corpses. When their life functions ceased, the bewildering invisibility ability was no longer effective. The weakness of the blade beast's low defense was completely exposed at this moment. Balshan's tank was similarly riddled with scars. The machine gun at the top of the turret was long gone, and the huge body of the tank had several holes. Black blood even splattered into the tank. The enemy's closest stab was just a few centimeters away, and she could almost feel the burning magic from the claws. However, this was the greatest difference between a machine and a living being. Even though it was riddled with scars, the tank's performance didn't drop in the slightest. It maintained its full speed as it charged towards the plaza, and the crushed organs of the enemy became the lubricant between the wheels. Perhaps sensing that the situation wasn't good, the nest mother began to turn around and flee. However, its massive body could only be described as clumsy. This wasn't the swirling sea. What's the most important factor in shooting accurately? Balshan asked. Close enough, Sure answered seriously. Then don't miss this time. Bei shouted as he controlled the tank to charge towards the target. The front of the tank stabbed into the enemy's ribcage. The monster instantly let out a shrill howl. Looking from the gunner's position, the entire field of vision was filled with targets. Sure pressed the button without hesitation. The 75mm grenade was unloaded and shot into its waist, almost penetrating its entire body before exploding in its head. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1463. 15 minutes later, another tank squad arrived at the area where Convoy 12 and 9 were fighting. Amy Balshan, are you alright? Iffy, who was in the lead, asked loudly from afar. Balshan waved her hand to indicate that she was fine, while Amy shouted excitedly, "Why are you here? We killed a big guy." I heard the explosion from this side. Iffy was relieved to see that they were unharmed. She jumped off the tank and walked quickly to the corpse of the monster that had been pierced by the grenade. She asked in surprise, "What is this?" "It should be a nest mother, but to be honest, I'm not too sure," Balshan muttered. The previous blast could be considered clean and efficient. Not only did it mash up its organs, it even blasted its head into the sky. Of course, whether or not the monster had a head was another matter. After all, according to common sense, creatures usually wouldn't retreat and escape. When it died, its magic dissipated, and its entire body collapsed in an instant, turning into a pile of meat paste. The only parts that were still standing were 2 rows of broken ribs. "Are you sure this is a nest mother?" Iffy took out the manual and compared it with a frown. The skeleton looks similar, but it's smaller and there aren't many tentacles. Right, did you see the eyes inside its body? The giant compound eyes were one of the most prominent features of the nest mother. According to the manual, they were about the same size as the nest mother's organs, and were located in the middle of its body. It was impossible to miss them. Balshan shook her head. "I'm guessing it's a nest mother because it brought along a large number of blade beasts. As for the other details, I'm as clueless as you. But..." She paused slightly. Not to mention the nest mother, none of the monsters here match the illustrations in the manual. If you don't believe me, look at the dead blade beasts. Iffy then noticed that the blade beasts in front of the nest mother were a little strange. These are wings? That's right, Balshan replied. They look as light and thin as cicada wings, but they are much larger. Using these wings, they can even pounce over long distances. This has never been seen on blade beasts before. I can roughly understand why the higher-ups want us to retrieve the intact Skysea realm samples. Iffy sighed after pondering for a while. The speed of their changes is too astonishing. That's a problem for the higher-ups to consider. Balshan climbed up the tank and gestured to Iffy to set off. As for us, we just have to destroy them. The report of the First Army's recapture of the ruins of Tequila was soon sent to Roland's office. In this city war, the demonic beasts were no longer the main opponents. This was the first time the Skysea realm had appeared in groups, and most of them were extremely threatening blade beasts. However, compared to the previous time when one or two blade beasts were able to render the army's defensive line ineffective, the outcome this time was completely different. The newly formed armored corps played a decisive role in this battle. Not only did they lock onto the enemy's position, but they also won the majority of the battle. The First Army finally annihilated the Skysea realm at a minimal cost, regaining a foothold on the fertile plains. Among them, Convoy number 12 and number 9 worked together to annihilate a nest mother and more than 10 blade beasts, while coming out unscathed. This completely changed the military's view. Other than describing the battle, the rest of the report was to request for the production of more tanks. Even if there weren't enough witches, it would be fine to have ordinary sergeants as train captains. Clearly, they had fully tasted the sweetness of such a heavy equipment that combined both offense and defense. Roland was not surprised by this result. The title of the King of Land Battles was established in 2 world-scale wars. No matter which aspect, tanks were tested for a long time. If not, he wouldn't have selected a group of soldiers from the army to train their driving skills when the tractor was first introduced. Compared to this mature weapon, he was more concerned about the monster corpses that were transported back by the train. In the afternoon, Agatha from the Magic Tower called to inform him that the autopsy had a preliminary conclusion. As he approached the bottom level of the Magic Tower, Roland immediately felt a gust of cold wind blow at him. The huge basement was neatly arranged with a pile of ice cubes. Those who didn't know would think that it was an ice storage, but he knew that the ice cubes contained frozen Skysea realm samples that were transported back from the front lines for the Witch Union's research. In the middle of the room was the autopsy area. Agatha took off her gloves and gave him a Union salute with her hands crossed. "You look a little happy," Roland said, tightening his collar. "Because I can return to my old profession." Agatha smiled. "To be honest, the cold laboratory suits me better. I'm not good at representing the Tequila in expeditions or attending political meetings." Pasha was obviously the most suitable representative for the ancient witches, but unfortunately, it was inconvenient to move the carrier. Therefore, Agatha naturally became the second choice. Looking at Roland's hesitant expression, the Ice Witch waved her hand. "Don't worry, Your Majesty. The Battle of Divine will take precedence." "I understand that." He nodded and went straight to the point. "So what did you discover?" "Your Majesty, please look over here." Agatha condensed an ice blade from her fingertip and stabbed it into a huge organ on the autopsy table. This was taken from a new nest mother. In its interior, I found obvious signs of aging. I have never seen such a problem in any of the blade beasts. Aging. Roland pricked up his brows. He noticed that there were indeed large wrinkles and black spots where the ice blade pointed. That's right. Magic power can strengthen the body of a magic user. This has been proven on witches and demons, so the Skysea realm is naturally no exception. And the most obvious characteristic of such strengthening is the extension of one's lifespan. Agatha explained in detail. I've checked the information provided by the demons. There was no mention of how long a nest mother can live. Instead, it was mentioned that blade beasts and legged beasts don't have long lifespans. Even if they die, the nest mother can quickly hatch new beasts. You mean the situation is reversed? Nightingale asked. Could it be that this nest mother is nearing the end of its life? If there was only one, it would indeed be difficult to make a judgment. But I found similar situations with the 4 bodies that were transported back from the front lines. This is too much of a coincidence. Agatha said slowly. And you have fought with nest mothers before, so you know how big they are. Compared to their size, these monsters that are less than 10 meters long don't seem to be the type that has lived for a long time. That seems to make sense. Besides, be it the thin wings used for pouncing or the growing scythe claws, they are all contrary to their past habits. She turned to look at Roland. Your Majesty, I don't think this thing can swim in the sea like it used to. So your conclusion is? Roland asked with a solemn expression. The nest mother is probably transferring its magic power to its servants to create a stronger source of soldiers, Agatha said, enunciating each word. But the direction of their evolution is away from the sea. It can even be said that they have sacrificed the future of their race. Roland sighed. But we are in trouble. Apex. Chapter 1464. North of the Fertile Plains. Counting from the day they left Neverwinter, Lightning and Maggie had been flying for nearly 10 days. They patrolled the plains at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour, which was the economical speed of flight. The magic power recovered at night was enough to sustain them for a day. Only when they needed to camp or hunt would they land. The exploration group had already entered a region they had never set foot in. Although they had a map from the era of the Union, the centuries of change was enough to cause the roads to be abandoned, the canals to dry up, and most of the towns to be swallowed up by weeds and shrubs. They could no longer be used as road markers. The only things that could guide them were the stars in the sky and the hazy ridge of the continent in the distance. At this distance, the sigil of listening was no longer able to transmit messages. It was as though there was only one person and one bird left on the vast land. This feeling of insignificance and loneliness was a huge obstacle to adventuring. Without a companion, Lightning did not know if she could persevere alone. Their objective was clear: to confirm the location and route of the demon's new deity of gods. At the same time, they would light up the plains outside of Tequila. That being said, it wasn't an easy task to find a floating island in such a vast land. To reduce the depletion of the mineral veins, the enemy's capital would not fly too high, and might even fly close to the ground. As such, the deity of gods looked like a small hill from afar. They had to close the distance to within 100 kilometers before they could confirm the target based on the red mist, and that was under good weather conditions. Thus, to avoid brushing shoulders with the deity of gods, Lightning chose a zigzag flight path, and the edge of the zigzag was the ridge of the continent. Gulp! Suddenly the gray eagle's stomach emitted a muffled sound. You're hungry again? Lightning raised her head. Oh. Maggie nodded repeatedly. You clearly didn't move. Why are you getting hungry faster than me? Because I've been staring at the ground, oh. She leaned over and rubbed Lightning's cheek. The eyes are connected to the brain. And the book says that people who use their brains work the hardest. Wait, that's not what was written in natural science at all. It clearly said that even when a person is motionless, the brain is the organ that consumes the most energy in the body. This doesn't mean that people who move don't need to use their brains. But the itch on her cheek made it impossible for Lightning to fly properly. She had to slow down and land on the ground. Judging from the color of the sky, they could fly for another half an hour at most. It wouldn't be a problem for them to rest early. What's more, there wasn't much meat left in the bag, so using this time to replenish his food was a good choice. Of course, the most important thing was that she really couldn't bring herself to reject Maggie, who was trying to act cute. As usual, you go hunting and I'll start the fire. If anything happens, contact me with the sigil of listening immediately. Understood? Understood. Before he finished speaking, Maggie had already risen into the air and transformed into a devil beast, flying towards the ground. Reluctantly, Lightning found a shelter and began to prepare for dinner. With Roland's technical support, the necessary equipment for adventuring such as flint, tinder, and torch were replaced by more delicate industrial products, such as a windproof match that was only the size of half a palm, a flashlight that used disposable dry batteries, and a multi-purpose knife that every explorer loved so much that they couldn't bear to part with it. These things could all be stored in one bag. Because of this, most of the space in her backpack was replaced by a variety of spices. As long as she had enough time, she could make a table full of dishes without repeating them. Sometimes, even Lightning herself wasn't sure if she was better at adventuring or was more talented at food. Perhaps this had something to do with Maggie's hunger. Everything went smoothly. The little girl quickly caught a bison and used her sharp claws to cut it into several pieces. Lightning took the essence of the bison and smoked it or buried it in the mud to roast it. The two had already repeated this process countless times, and their cooperation was smooth. When the bonfire went out, they not only filled their stomachs, but also filled up their dry food bags. Everything seemed to return to the moment when they were ready to set off. The only thing that didn't make much progress was probably the goal of this trip. But this little bit of guilt was soon covered up by the tiredness that came after a full meal. After setting up the sigil of screaming, Lightning held Maggie in her sleeping bag and soon fell asleep. The next day, when she opened her eyes, she unexpectedly found that there seemed to be a shadow on the horizon in the distance. Puzzled, Lightning rubbed her eyes. It should still be a plane. Yesterday they had repeatedly confirmed the surrounding terrain, so they should not have missed this hillside. It took her a few minutes to get used to her sleepy eyes. She held her breath and looked up again, but she was stunned. Through the thin morning mist, she could see that the top of the mountain was very flat, and it did not look like it was formed by nature at all. What was more surprising was that in just a few minutes, it had actually grown bigger, which meant that the shadow was approaching them. And in the entire fertile plains, Lightning only knew of one mountain peak that could move. She shook Maggie awake in disbelief. "Peck me, coo." The latter curled her index finger and flicked it on her forehead. The pain was extremely clear. It was not an illusion. Right at this moment, a gust of morning wind brushed past the two of them, causing Maggie's long white hair to flutter. At the same time, the mist that resembled a veil was blown away. In that instant, the shadow revealed its true appearance. On top of the black mountain that resembled an inverted triangular cone stood a gigantic pyramid-shaped object. It was completely constructed from obsidian, and its size was difficult to estimate. If the center of the deity of gods was said to be a demon city, then this pyramid was enough to envelop the entire city. This was probably the reason why there were no signs of the red mist spreading from the top of the mountain. The two inverted pyramids, one large and one small, gave the floating island an oppressive feeling. The previous deity of gods had a slight resemblance to a mountain range, but the new king's city was completely unnatural. Be it the regular lines on the surface or the symmetrical structure, they all seemed to display the power of the demons. They never expected that the second deity of gods that they had been searching for would appear right in front of them. Lightning did not even bother to pack up her sleeping bag as she pulled Maggie and flew up. As they continued to rise, the scenery behind King's City gradually became clearer. Densely packed black dots surged on the plains like a surging tide. In between the tides, there were countless red lines. Together with the black dots, they formed a cloth that devoured everything. Lightning could not help but gulp. If those were all demons, their numbers could very well be more than the humans of the four kingdoms combined. Without a doubt, they were the main force of the enemy's migration. Calm. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1465. The detective group immediately brought the news back to Neverwinter. They've really turned out in full force. After listening to Lightning's report, Roland heaved a sigh of relief. This would undoubtedly be the first head-on clash between the two races, and it might very well be the last. Regardless of the outcome, it would determine the fate of both humans and demons. "Can we win?" Lightning asked hesitantly. She was covered in dirt, and the hair on her forehead was bunched up. He could smell the sour smell of sweat when he got close. It was obvious that she had not rested for the past few days in order to inform him of her findings as soon as possible. Of course, Roland pretended to be relaxed as he patted her shoulder. "Not only do we have to win, but we have to win cleanly." The demons had an indisputable advantage in terms of numbers, which showed how much pressure the Sky-Sea realm was putting on them. It was true that the First Army had an advantage in technology, but they could not kill the enemy without suffering any casualties. Once they entered the Four Kingdoms, even if they won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. By the same logic, even if the demons won, they would definitely suffer heavy losses. Therefore, if they did not stop them in the west of the impassable mountain range, the best outcome would be for both sides to suffer heavy losses. Lightning heaved a sigh of relief, but then suddenly felt a little embarrassed. Do I smell a little weird? Roland laughed involuntarily. A little, but it's the smell of exploration, so there's nothing wrong with it. He deliberately sniffed. To be honest, I think it's not bad. Lightning's face suddenly turned red. She grabbed Maggie, who was sniffing her collar, and walked out of the office with her head lowered. I'm going to the bathroom to take a bath. Coo. Maggie still looked confused. Lightning, Maggie. As the two were about to leave, Roland called out to them and said slowly, "Thank you for your hard work. Have a good rest." Okay. After closing the door, he immediately grabbed the phone of the director of the administrative office. Inform all ministers for a meeting. It's time to set off. In the conference hall, the higher-ups of Neverwinter sat in a circle. Roland stuck Lightning's drawing on the map behind him and repeated all the discoveries of the exploration team. There are 2 points that can be confirmed. Firstly, the new deity of gods does exist. It is less than 300 kilometers away from the ridge of the continent and is constantly moving east. Secondly, it's carrying a large number of devils, so many that the floating island can't accommodate them. That's why it's using such an inefficient method to transport them. I don't think it's hard to understand the former. In order to invade the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart, the Demon's Western Front army not only built obelisks in the mountain ridges, but they also opened up a supply line through the Land of Dawn. Flying along the mountain range will not only prevent us from deviating from our course, but it will also allow the supply line to share the burden of the red mist. It's a relatively safe route. The exact number of the latter is unknown, but since they've come out in full force, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to estimate that there are tens of millions of devils capable of fighting. According to the current speed, they will reach the border of the Four Kingdoms in a month and a half at most. Upon mentioning the number of enemies, Roland noticed that many of them revealed looks of fear. But they could not be blamed. After experiencing the 2 battles of divine will, humanity was greatly weakened. It was hard to say if there were even tens of millions of survivors, much less soldiers that could be used in battle. To Barav and the rest, the scale of tens of millions was no different from an astronomical figure. This is the enemy's last resort, and also a battle that will determine the fate of humanity. The Eleanor floating island has to set off immediately and stop the enemies from advancing east before they reach the impassable mountain range. But, Your Majesty, Barav said with difficulty, the number of enemies is astonishing, and the number of troops that the floating island can carry is extremely limited. Wouldn't it be too risky to take the initiative to attack? Defending Greycastle is the riskiest plan. Edith stood up and glanced at the director. Everyone, there's no need to be frightened by the tens of millions of devils. If they can't reach Greycastle, it doesn't matter how many there are. If you use your brain to think about it, you'll understand that the Blackstone region didn't only have so many devils since the 3rd Battle of Divine Will. The reason why they can't come over is because the red mist supply can't keep up. Therefore, our true goal is only one, and that is the enemy's floating city. The moment she said that, the atmosphere in the hall changed subtly. After all, no one was willing to admit that they were afraid of the enemy. That's right. Roland held back his laughter and nodded slightly. Without the red mist provided by the moving obelisks, the devils will find it difficult to move an inch on the fertile plains. Besides, setting off now doesn't mean that we have to fight immediately. The time we have on the road should be enough for the troops to make preparations. There was one more point that he did not mention. That was the Sky Lord and Silent Disaster, who had returned to Sky City to reorganize their troops. Since the devils had made use of the Western Front supply line, it was impossible for Hacksword not to know the location of the new King's City. To the king of the devil race, he was a complete traitor. Therefore, obtaining more power was the best way to protect himself. The fall of King's City was undoubtedly the best opportunity for him. When that moment came, Hacksword would not be indifferent. At this thought, Roland looked at Tilly. By the way, how's the takeoff and landing training for the Air Knight? It's easier than I thought. Tilly replied calmly. There's not much difference between taking off and landing from the floating island and taking off from the ground. As long as the weather permits, the students can easily complete it. The only problem is that in the past, the pilots only needed to see the impassable mountain range or the coastline to roughly determine their location and find the airport on land. But in the future, both sides will be constantly moving. Coupled with the lack of landmarks in the fertile plains, there will be a certain degree of difficulty in locating the destination during the return flight. Of course, this isn't a problem that can't be solved. All you need to do is provide sufficient fuel. This was also a huge problem for aircraft carriers. On a battlefield that spanned hundreds of kilometers, a slight deviation would eventually add up to a huge error. Fortunately, compared to the unchanging sea, no matter how desolate the land was, there would always be a few coordinates that could be used for positioning, such as forests, rivers, mountains, and so on. Roland could roughly guess the other party's plan. If they were unfamiliar with it, they should practice more. After flying more, they would naturally be able to know their location. Don't worry. You can let them fly for as long as you want, he agreed. In this decisive battle, the Air Knight would undoubtedly be the main force. It was also because of this air force that humans had the chance to stop the demon city from thousands of kilometers away. Seeing that no one else spoke, Roland looked around the hall and ordered in a deep voice. Then, I announced that Project Sky has entered the third stage. Set sail from the floating island, and our target is the fertile plains northern region. Chapter 1466. 2 days later, the floating island Eleanor completed its final resupply at the Broken Cliff Pier and took off for the hinterland of the Land of Dawn. Nearly 100,000 residents of Neverwinter sent it off. They flooded the streets, climbed onto roofs, and even ascended the impassable mountain range to witness this historic moment. The entire western side of the city was filled with people, once again setting a record for the number of people participating in a group activity. And this was only a portion of Neverwinter's population. There were even more people bustling about the factories, ports, and farms, participating in the expedition in another way. Coincidentally, on the same day, the total population of the Border District and Longsong District officially broke the million mark, with more than 50% of them coming from the Kingdom of Wolfheart and Everwinter. Although they were not as attached to Neverwinter as the previous migrants, they could still feel the incomparable shock from the surging tide of people, as well as the extraordinary significance of this day. Accompanied by the orderly sound of a cannon salute, the Eleanor cruised along the mountains to Longsong Stronghold before turning to the west and gradually disappearing from everyone's sight. But the excitement of the residents did not stop because of this. Greycastle Weekly's follow-up report caused the newspaper's sales to reach a new high. Be it on the streets or in the alleys, everyone's topic was inseparable from this attack. Gradually, the day of departure gained a common name. People called it the Miracle Day, representing the beginning of humanity's conquest of the sky. This was also the second incident after the miracle building to be crowned a miracle. The floating island was much more peaceful. After the initial novelty passed, the engineering team continued their intense and orderly work. It was the same for the Air Knight. Apart from the routine reconnaissance team, all the cadets had to take off at least once a day to familiarize themselves with the surrounding terrain. The huge floating island, the busy landing zone, and the smoky furnace zone formed a unique spectacle. How does it feel? Can you still adapt to this new body? In the core region of the floating island, Roland stood at the bottom of the mine and looked at Eleanor, who was tightly bound to the god's stone pillar. In this month, not only had the stone pillar grown much larger, the parent body had also grown many new tentacles that burrowed into the soil beneath her feet like a plant that had taken root. According to her, these tentacles could provide her with additional senses, allowing her to better control the floating island. In a sense, the floating island was a shell, and the tentacles were her nerves. It's much better than before. Eleanor's voice was light and cheerful. I can see, I can hear, and I can think. What's there to be dissatisfied about? I was already much luckier than Elena and the others. Lord Third Chiefs, you're exaggerating. Pasha lowered her mane beard and said, everyone knows that if it weren't for your active fusion, none of us would have survived. Besides, you didn't even know that such a day would come. This courage is enough. I'm talking about the result, not the process. Eleanor interrupted her. I believe that I was not the only one who was willing to sacrifice herself for the Union. I was merely the first to do so. Looks like she's in good shape, Roland thought. He had always been a little worried that a witch who had fought against demons for decades would eventually become a demon. Would it cause psychological problems? But from the looks of it, Eleanor's temperament was unusually mature, and she did not feel the slightest bit troubled by her body. I know what you're thinking. Eleanor suddenly changed the topic back to him. Are you afraid that I'll be depressed and become autistic? If I was the only one left in the world, I might have done so. But everyone is basically here now, and the prospects of war are much better than 400 years ago. There are so many new things to learn. So where would I find the time to become autistic? Learn? The Union was able to become the ruler of mankind, not only because of their abilities. Back then, we were also the ones who had the most advanced technology and thoughts. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that we were the three representatives. Although the glory of the Union is gone, to keep up with the progress of the times, we still have to rely on learning. Roland was speechless. This familiar phrase was obviously learned from the gods' punishment witches. God knows what they had taught her. So where are you learning now? University. Eleanor replied. I'm about to graduate. Previously, it was Celine and Ling who were teaching Lady Eleanor, but now, it's Lady Eleanor who is teaching them. Pasha added with a smile. Hey, it hasn't even been 2 months since she woke up, and she's already finished with university content? Roland was speechless. Previously, when Eleanor forced Mask to retreat, he didn't think too much about it. Now he realized that he might have underestimated the ability of dozens of minds to learn together. Right, I've also created a small core instrument. It might be helpful in the upcoming battle. Under Eleanor's instructions, Pasha rolled up a palm-sized skeleton and placed it in her palm. It floated leisurely with a blue radiance in the center, resembling a huge magic power core. What's the use of this? Roland asked curiously. It can simulate some telekinesis abilities to influence external objects, such as turning a handle, pulling a trigger, and so on. If it is combined with specific mechanical devices and firearms, I will be able to control them through magic power. Eleanor explained. Although Mask stripped this body of its mobility, it didn't seal the magic power. This also means that when the enemy attacks, I can control the weapons and personally participate in the battle. The principle is somewhat similar to the automatic weapon stations in the dream world. Roland gaped in shock. And that wasn't the end. She continued. Shooting is essentially a form of calculation, and this is what I'm good at. Compared to ordinary soldiers, I can increase the accuracy of firearms to more than 90% within the effective range. The disadvantage is that I can't move flexibly, and I have to coordinate with fixed cannon turrets. I also have to place tentacles and miniature cores in advance. But at least in the battle to defend the floating island, these weapon stations will be extremely efficient. How many can you control at the same time? That depends on the number of tentacles. She paused. I think there should be at least a few hundred. Imagining hundreds of machine gun turrets and even cannons firing accurately at the enemy under Eleanor's control, Roland couldn't help but click his tongue. But this wasn't what he was most impressed by. What he was more concerned about was Eleanor's method of combining magic power and machinery. The knowledge of both came from Mask Nasapel and the dream world. Not only did she absorb them, she even took the initiative to fuse them together. Given time, how much change could she bring to this world? If not for the fact that this operation can't leave the floating island, I really don't wish for you to participate in the battle. Roland revealed his thoughts. What humans currently lack the most is a guide in this aspect. Oh, aren't you afraid that my understanding far exceeds yours? Eleanor seemed to be chuckling. Lady Eleanor. Pasha seemed to want to dissuade her, but she didn't know what to say. Why should I be afraid? Roland asked in return. It's extremely normal for successors to surpass their predecessors. At the very least, it means that civilization is constantly improving. If I'm the upper limit of humanity's knowledge, then the future will truly be bleak. She fell silent for a moment before speaking again. As a king, you are indeed not qualified. But you are a trustworthy leader. Apex. Chapter 1467. Nightingale laid out the quilt and turned to blow out the candles. The room immediately darkened. After getting used to electric lamps and magic stones, it was a little hard to adapt to the life of candles. Sleeping in the wild was a common thing in the past, she thought with some amusement. However, there was no other way. The tight schedule did not allow the floating island to install a full set of electric lighting systems. Even the place for them to rest was dug out from the rock wall. After that, Soroya laid a soft layer to isolate the moisture underground, and it became a bedroom. The furniture was the most common wooden table and a simple wardrobe. The mattress was directly placed on the ground. Although Isabella was also on the floating island, the factories that needed magic stones to light up the most were obviously the ones that were rushing to work. It would probably take some time before the god stones she converted could be used in the living area. Fortunately, although the room was simple, it was not uncomfortable to live in. Not only could one person enjoy one room, it also came with a separate bathroom. Coupled with the ventilation pipe that connected to the outer wall of the floating island, the room did not feel stuffy at all. At the end of the cave, there was also a public reading room and a hot spring to meet the daily needs of the witches. She was not very interested in the former, but the latter was really great. Who knew how Pasha and the others found this place? The stream that seeped down from the top of the mountain converged into a clear spring in the karst cave, and a part of the pool extended out of the cave wall. Leaning against the edge of the pool, one could see the scenery outside. Especially after the floating island flew, this place became a wonderful place to overlook the earth. Every day after her bath, she would soak in the spring for a while to enjoy this rare moment of relaxation. In comparison, the disadvantage of the room not having electric lights became insignificant. Just as Nightingale was about to lie down, there was a sudden knock on the door. She could not help but be startled. It was already late at night, and everyone was basically asleep. Who would come looking for her? Coming. Nightingale responded and lit the candles again. At the same time, a few candidates appeared in her mind. Naturally, the most likely one was Vendi. After all, this person in charge of the alliance had drunk too much and came to chat with her several times. However, when she opened the door, she was stunned. The person standing outside the door was actually Anna. She was carrying a small wooden bucket with towels and other cleaning items in it. Can you accompany me to take a bath? Nightingale had already taken a bath before going to bed, but she realized that taking a bath at this time was obviously not the main point. Of course, wait a moment. After packing their things, they followed Anna all the way into the bathhouse. The whole cave was empty, and there was no one else except for them. The sound of water droplets splashing onto the stalagmites could be heard from time to time. It was especially tranquil in the night. Taking off her clothes and stepping into the pool, Nightingale immediately felt a warm current envelop her body. Unlike in Neverwinter, the amount of fuel on the floating island was extremely limited, so they generally used boilers and steam engines powered by magic cubes to ensure a continuous supply of hot water 24 hours a day. The two of them parted the white mist and slowly walked to the entrance of the cave. In an instant, the cool night breeze swept away the stuffy heat in the cave, and the world in front of them suddenly became clear. What they saw was no longer the jagged rocks, but a boundless night sky full of twinkling stars. Nightingale could not help but let out a soft snort. This kind of feeling was really intoxicating. Anna also seemed to be quite satisfied. She let out a long breath, spread her hands, and stretched her waist. Where's Roland? Probably in the dream world. Really? He's really busy. That's right. Everyone says that I'm not idle for a moment, but in fact, compared to him, this is nothing. Anna smiled. He even works the whole night. You're also very good. Nightingale lowered her body so that the spring water was over her shoulders. You used to be a little girl who didn't know anything, but now you can take charge. Actually, not really. Anna showed a rare expression of embarrassment. I'm only good at technical aspects. If it weren't for Barav and Teacher Carr who helped me a lot, I'm afraid the engineering department would have been in a mess. Hey, you're so unscrupulously talking about your shortcomings. Looking at Anna, Nightingale's heart surged with a very complicated feeling. It was impossible to say that she did not have any regrets. She had clearly met Roland earlier and had more opportunities to take that step, but in the end, she was a little slower. But she could not hate Anna no matter what. She was honest, serious, and consistent. The more time she spent with her, the more she marveled at her purity. Nightingale had seen many people in her life, from commoners to nobles, but no one was as clear and dazzling as Anna. She admired her from the bottom of her heart. After a short silence, Anna changed the topic. What do you think the outcome of the Battle of Divine will be? Nightingale realized that this might be the reason why she asked her to come. Probably, it will be very smooth. She looked up at the stars in the sky. To be honest, deducing the battle situation or predicting the future was completely beyond her capabilities. The true answer should be that she did not know, but it did not seem appropriate to say so before the battle. Thankfully, the other party did not have the ability to detect lies. Is that so? Anna did not echo. But I don't think so. Especially with the final goal being the bottomless land, the legendary domain of God. The risks of this trip will probably far exceed our expectations. For some reason, I have a nagging feeling that Roland will disappear at any moment. The closer we get to the northern end of the continent, the stronger the sense of unease. Nightingale could not help but feel her heart skip a beat. Could it be that she had sensed the fact that Roland did not have much lifespan left? But it should be related to the realm of mind. Heading to the bottomless land was to resolve this problem, so it should not be impossible to change it. Maybe you are worrying too much. I hope so too. Anna blinked. By the way, do you still remember our agreement? Nightingale was stunned for a moment before she reacted. I've decided to bring it forward. After I defeat the demon, I will personally talk to him. Why? Is it because of your premonition? Part of the reason, Anna replied gently. But the main reason is that he needs you. And I have never hated you. I'll leave him to you for the upcoming battle. Ugh. Nightingale was momentarily speechless. After a long while she muttered, if that's the case, why didn't you stop him from heading to the bottomless land? Anna shook her head, her expression calm. This is the best method after considering all aspects. Besides, regardless of the outcome, he is already prepared, so how can I stop him? Fear and avoidance cannot change anything, so what I can do is to do my best to help him complete this mission, and witness the future with my own eyes. Chapter 1468. After entering the plains, the time on the Eleanor floating island gradually converged. Most of the people only knew that they were moving, but they did not know where they were headed. Only the high-ranking officials in the command post knew that they were slowly closing the distance between them and their target. The flight path marked on the map clearly indicated this. Every 12 hours, the floating island would adjust its direction to the east. According to the intelligence sent by the exploration team, in at most 18 days, their flight path would intersect with the path of the new deity of gods. But the peace did not last until that day. 14 days after the official departure, the unchanging days were broken. The first to discover the enemy was an old fire of heaven. It belonged to the Reconnaissance Air Force, and was one of the few remaining two-seater models. The rear seat was no longer equipped with machine guns, but was instead equipped with a spark telegraph and a radio set. It was considered a specially modified version specialized in reconnaissance. A devil beast is approaching us from 150 kilometers away. According to protocol, the crew first used a telegraph to send out the information before repeating it with a walkie-talkie. The former was to inform the floating island, while the latter was to warn their companions in the nearby airspace. Due to the excellent electromagnetic environment, the receiver quickly received the message and translated it. When he relayed the message on a piece of paper, The atmosphere in the staff room froze before it instantly flared up. Quickly confirm the identity and location of the crew. Sound the alarm. Get the engineering team to retreat. Hey, this is the General Staff Department. Please prepare for battle. Ground crew reporting. Elevator number 5 and elevator number 11 have malfunctioned and are undergoing emergency repairs. At this time, get them to hurry. Upon receiving the notification, Roland rushed to the command post immediately. What's the situation now? The enemy is more than 2 hours away from us, Edith reported with a stack of documents. They are heading northeast, and there are more than 30 of them. The reconnaissance aircraft has already shaken off their pursuit, but they do not seem to have changed their original route. You mean to say that the demons have discovered the floating island? Iron Axe asked. Probably not, otherwise they wouldn't have sent so few people. But the demons must have sensed something for their route to be so clear. That's not surprising, Roland replied calmly. No matter how small the floating island was, it was still a floating mountain. It was nearly impossible for a target of this size to completely conceal themselves, just like how lightning and the rest discovered the deity of gods. As long as the distance between the two continued to close, the enemy would notice the uninvited guest sooner or later. Sylvie's magical eyes are more focused on the sky. It's normal for a team of demons to bump into us on the ground. The Pearl of the Northern region nodded. Their main purpose is probably to verify the intelligence. The aerial knight should be able to wipe out this number of devil beasts. Whether we kill them all or let a few escape, it won't affect the outcome. Roland had already realized this. With the speed of the Eleanor cruiser, it was impossible to avoid the devil beasts. In a sense, the exposure of the floating island was a foregone conclusion. The key is how to minimize the cost. The scale of the aerial knight had been steadily increasing. Ever since the battle at the impassable mountain range, the first-generation Fire of Heaven and the second-generation Fury of Heaven had exceeded 200, which was about the number of 2 divisions. But the problem was that the enemy had turned out in full force. Be it their military strength or logistics, they were no longer restricted. No matter how good the exchange was, it was inevitable for the planes to suffer losses. Roland did not expect to be able to suppress them in the air during the decisive battle. He only hoped to cover the bomber's successful dropping of the bombs. This undoubtedly required the use of all the planes, and if the aerial knight suffered heavy losses in the early stages, it would drag down the entire plan. You mean to use Plan B to meet the enemy? Tilly raised her brows. That's right, we can also test the witch's results. Roland did not hesitate any further. Get your men to enter the basement. 2 hours later, the enemy discovered traces of the floating island. Just as Edith had said, the devil beasts were indeed here to investigate. However, to everyone's surprise, the devil beast stopped about 40 to 50 kilometers away. The leader used a device similar to a telescope to observe for a moment before turning around and returning without any intention of probing. It seems that the demons have learned a lot from Mask. The Pearl of the Northern region smiled. Now they finally know how to respect their opponent. The enemy will never surrender. Iron Axe stared at the sky and said, "The next few days won't be as peaceful as before." Of course. Edith's voice was as cold as the snow of the northern region. And this is the best opportunity to weaken their strength. That afternoon, the first wave of the demons' attack appeared on the horizon. They did not seem to want to wait for even a day. Of course, more than an hour ago, the army had already made preparations for battle. All the gates to the external passageways had been closed, and the biplanes that were not part of the investigation team had landed in the underground hangar. The entire surface of the floating island was empty, and even the windows of the bridge that had been modified from the top of the North Slope mountain had been sealed shut. At this moment, Eleanor's floating island was almost as impenetrable as a gigantic stone mountain. The upper echelons had gathered in the command center, and through the projection screen created by the magic power core, they observed the situation outside. There were more than 200 devil beasts in this wave. When they formed a horizontal line and charged towards the floating island, even the sky seemed to darken a little. Tisk, there's quite a number of them. Tilly frowned. Roland nodded. I reckon that this is just the vanguard. After all, the troops following behind the Demons King's city were the entire strength of the Blackstone region. Since the mad demons were estimated to number in the tens of millions, the number of devil beasts would not be small either. Perhaps this was the last moment of peace for them. There's enough of them, but what can they do to a mountain? Suddenly, a voice cut into everyone's mind. The mellow voice had a hint of laziness to it, making it unforgettable. The speaker was Eleanor. Roland laughed. This was the most invulnerable point of the strategy. Indeed, the humans did not have many ways to deal with the deity of gods, but it was the same for the demons. I'll leave the rest to you. Don't worry, this is revenge after more than 4 centuries. Eleanor replied. In her field of vision, an invisible net was slowly unfurling, and the devil beasts moving on the net had all turned into strings of numbers. Mathematics is truly an interesting thing. She injected magic power into the tentacles and transmitted it to the entire floating island. Nearly 100 activated miniature cores blossomed with blue light, and the machinery connected to them began to operate. The machine gun turrets scattered around the island turned towards the direction of the enemy's attack, and the gun barrels extended out from the firing holes towards the sky. The moment the devil beasts entered the firing range, countless streams of light shot out, turning the invisible net into a dazzling screen of light visible to the naked eye. Chapter 1469. Among the long whips formed by the tracer bullets, the 20mm autocannons were undoubtedly the most eye-catching. Due to the higher chamber pressure, the compressed and glowing matchstick stones were also brighter. In addition, the tracer bullets were much more compact than the autocannons, so there were almost no gaps in their flight paths. The devil beasts that were hit by the autocannons had no room to struggle. Being penetrated by a ball of light meant that several bullets had landed on their bodies at the same time. Even if they only hit their wings, the bullets would tear a huge hole in their wings. Of course, compared to the wings, it was more common for the devil beasts to be hit by bullets. Accompanied by bursts of blood, a few devil beasts tumbled to the ground. The mad demons on their bodies could only let out their final howls and wait for the moment they collided with the ground. The enemies were not intimidated by such a formation. They used a steep descent to increase their speed while scattering to the sides in an attempt to shake off the marksman's pursuit. Under normal circumstances, this would undoubtedly be the most effective method. When faced with a target flying horizontally, the soldiers of the First Army would habitually engage in tailgating. Even the most experienced platoon would need a few seconds to adjust their aim. But this time it was Eleanor who was fighting them. In almost an instant, the devil beast's flight path formed a new trajectory on the coordinate network. It was the solution of countless algebraic equations, and when these solutions were put together, they marked the fate of the enemies. The screen of light twisted. This was the first impression that the higher-ups of the battle had. The tracer bullets were no longer straight. Instead, due to the rapid change in direction of the muzzle, they became curved arcs. These arcs intertwined with each other like ropes. Even though it looked messy, every bullet had its own clear target. Their extended lines were precisely in front of the devil beast's movements. If one did not know the reason, they would think that it wasn't the bullets catching up to the devil beasts, but the devil beasts themselves crashing into the bullets. I believe that Lady Eleanor must be very happy now, Phyllis suddenly said. Why? Roland asked, puzzled. In the battle where the tequila fell, the first to tear open the defensive line were the enemy's devil beasts. They appeared in the airspace that was difficult for us to reach and split up to attack the weak points of the defensive line. Even though the blessed army was running around, they were unable to guarantee that the entire city wall would be safe. The number of undamaged ballistae and catapults dwindled, and in the end, they were torn apart by the enemy's siege beasts. Back then, Lady Eleanor was covered in blood as she stood on the wall. Not a single demon dared to approach her, but the holy city behind her was ablaze. So that's what happened. Was that why she said something like 400 years of revenge? No matter how powerful a person was, there was no way he could save the holy city from being engulfed by a tidal wave of enemies. Now that she thought about it, her lazy tone suddenly had an indescribable heaviness. Now, Eleanor once again stood at the forefront of the battle of divine will. And this time, behind her was the power of the entire human race. They've split up. The light of dawn fill-in suddenly reminded. Through the magic curtain, the horde of devil beasts that had suffered a heavy blow suddenly split up. One group charged straight towards the surface of the floating island, while the other flew downwards, as if trying to avoid the angle of the machine gun. It was probably because the demons realized that regular dodging was no longer effective, so they no longer hoped to fight in the air. Instead, they planned to land and find cover. But Eleanor's defense was obviously not limited to just one layer. Following that, the inner perimeter of defense formed by the Mark I heavy machine guns joined the battle. Their turrets were smaller, almost half a meter tall. As there was no consideration for movement, the barrel was replaced with a longer water-cooled tube. These rotating firing platforms were distributed on the runway, bridge, tower, and other areas. They were meant to deal with enemies that attempted to jump into the fray. The mad demons that landed finally launched a counterattack. They abandoned the devil beasts that had landed under the hail of bullets and threw short spears or shot lightning at the turrets. Explosions immediately sounded above the floating island. Roland was surprised to discover that their short spears were no longer made of pure beast bones. Instead, they were mixed with something else. The tips of the spears were black and would explode upon contact with something. There were obvious sparks and smoke. The mad demons that could shoot lightning were also different from the ones that the Witch Cooperation Association had encountered. Not only were they able to cast their abilities faster, but they were also able to cover a greater distance. Clearly, this was an elite unit that had come prepared. If their opponents were the soldiers of the First Army, they might have been able to cause some chaos. But unfortunately, the turrets were only cold machines. They would not panic or hesitate. As long as they were powered, they would not stop firing. Even if one or two misfires occurred, it would not affect the other turrets. Of course, this was not Eleanor's final defensive measure. Two 75mm field cannons on the diagonal of the floating island were also activated and slowly pointed at the enemy's position. With a diameter of more than a kilometer, even small cannons were able to cover the entire area. This is the firearms war that Pasha and the others mentioned. Eleanor thought to herself. This wasn't a battle style that she was familiar with, but from the moment she opened fire, she fell in love with this feeling. From the start of the battle until now, she was the only one fighting against the demons. But even if she was alone, the demons would not be able to avoid her gaze and attack the weak spots of the defensive line. Even at the bottom of the floating island, she had prepared 4 20mm machine cannons and 2 longsong cannons for the enemy. This was a stronghold with no blind spots. Your tricks end here. Eleanor adjusted the cannons slightly, allowing the crosshairs of the field cannons to aim at a demon in the middle of the battlefield who was suppressed by the bullets. From its eye-catching armor and attire, it was most likely a higher ascendant. She then controlled the core to pull the firing cord. Boom! Rustle, rustle. With a series of rumbles and tremors, sand and gravel fell from the ceiling of the cavern. Is the First Army firing at the island? Will it be all right? Finkin swept the dust off his hair and looked up worriedly. The cannons will at most destroy the runway and will not affect the hangar. Besides, with Miss Lotus around, repairing the holes will be a piece of cake. The voice sounded unfamiliar, as though it was not a pilot from Class 1. Good, Finkin. And Heinz turned to look and realized that the speaker was the new ace of the newcomers, Manfeld. Greetings, seniors. He took the initiative to greet them. Hey, the challenger is here. Finkin nudged Good with his elbow and whispered. Good rolled his eyes at his companion and nodded. I think so too. I just don't know when we will be able to attack. It won't be long. Manfeld closed his eyes and listened for a moment. The intervals between the machine guns are decreasing, which means that the demons are unable to maintain their previous offensive. I believe that the higher-ups will soon give the order to counterattack. You can hear the sound of the machine guns through the rock stratum. Good revealed a surprised expression. If I pay full attention. Manfeld nodded. Finkin, on the other hand, mouthed at Heinz, stop acting. But at this moment, Her Highness Tilly's voice suddenly sounded from the hangar's loudspeaker. All free night. Board immediately and prepare for battle. Chapter 1470. All the upper echelons could clearly see the enemy's defeat. Be it landing on the island to attack or circling around in search of a breakthrough, the demons could not advance an inch. Under Eleanor's precise attacks, every minute they stayed was a huge risk. Such a high casualty rate was absolutely unacceptable to the Devil Beast troops. Flying meant speed, agility, and unhindered by the terrain. The Devil Beasts had ruled the skies for centuries and had the absolute initiative on the battlefield. But now they probably did not expect to lose more than half of their forces before even seeing their opponent. Some of the demons had already begun to retreat, or rather flee. This was a chance for the humans. The core goal of Plan B was to use the smallest price to obtain the greatest results, and chasing after the enemy had always been the best opportunity to expand the results of the battle. This was not a novel concept, but only the Eleanor Skycruiser could seamlessly switch between attack and defense. This was also the most obvious difference between the Skycruiser and other aircraft carrier platforms. Following Tilly's orders, the command center immediately began operating according to the corresponding procedures. Pipeline pressure injection complete. All steam pressure indicators are normal. Hatch 01 and 06 are about to open. Currently clearing the runway. Ground crew report requires another 5 minutes to prepare. The first batch of attackers is in position. Due to the large longitudinal size of the floating island, the hangar itself was equipped with a runway, and with the hangar as the center, the runway was scattered across the ground. Before these internal runways were used, they were tightly isolated by several thick and heavy protective doors, and only steam engines could open them. Although the length of each runway was greatly reduced, only about a third of the surface runway, it was enough for the light biplanes. Furthermore, it did not matter if they did not obtain sufficient initial speed. The difference in height between the floating island and the ground was enough for the heavy planes to raise their noses again. "Aren't you going personally?" Roland looked at Tilly. "This is a rare opportunity for actual combat. Let the newbies practice more." The latter smiled and grabbed the microphone. "Attack immediately after the hatch opens. The target. Leave no one alive." Although it was not Good's first time setting off from the hangar's runway, the previous ones were just practice. He finally understood why Her Highness repeatedly emphasized the need to wear earmuffs. More than 50 biplanes in the enclosed space started their engines at the same time. The rumbling sounds could be described as hair-raising. Even at a distance of 2 to 3 meters, one could only see the mouth of the ground crew's loud roar, and not hear the human voice. From the moment the order was issued, all communication between the aerial knights could only be completed through flags and hand gestures. He was the first to taxi onto the runway and into the takeoff position. Amidst the gushing steam, the iron gate that was thicker than an adult's body slowly opened. The runway extended forward section by section, and the gate at the end was clearly marked with the number 01. Since Her Highness Tilly was not here, he became the undisputed leader. Manfeld must be the first to enter the 6th gate. Challenger. Huh. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly. "Rachel, did you see that? In the past, I could only look up to the nobles from afar, but now it was their turn to chase after me." Even though the other party didn't express any obvious intentions, it wasn't a bad way to put it. The ground crew pushed out a wooden frame in front of him. On it were large cards that indicated the wind speed, temperature, and speed of the floating island outside. Typically, the hatch would be opened against the wind to allow the plane to obtain greater lift. Of course, considering the possibility of the hatch being attacked by the enemy during wartime, the most suitable runway for takeoff might not be used. At this time, the wind speed and other parameters were extremely important. The pilot had to step on the accelerator and prepare for a descent. Good gave the ground crew a thumbs-up sign. At this moment, the last gate finally rose up. The dazzling sunlight instantly pierced through the shadows at the end, gradually expanding from a small gap to illuminate the entire runway. A strong gust of wind surged into the hangar, dispersing the lingering smell of engine oil. With the wind level 5, it was the best time to strike. The ground crew raised the green signal flag high up and waved it down with force. "The road is clear, Good, move out." Good shouted as he pressed down on the control stick. The fury of heaven roared as it charged towards the ball of light. In the process of accelerating, he saw the hangar workers lined up on both sides of the runway, waving at him. The moment he passed through the ball of light, a brief white glow appeared before his eyes. But very quickly, everything returned to its original form, and the vast and boundless world appeared before his eyes. The noise in his ears no longer existed, as though it had become much quieter in an instant. The air that carried the fragrance of plants made him take a deep breath uncontrollably. Good took off his earmuffs and flew towards the floating island. The tracers that constantly shot out from the surroundings pointed him in the right direction. Looking at the devil beast that was escaping at 60 kilometers per hour, he chased after it without hesitation. In front of the magic projection, Roland couldn't help but clench his fists. This was the full appearance of a skyscraper mothership. A huge body, rich weaponry, and a carrier that could be released at any time. Just the sight of it was enough to make one's heart surge. One after another, biplanes flew out from the mountain and turned to chase after the fleeing devil beasts. Against the skyscraper knight that was several times faster than the devil beasts, the situation was completely one-sided. Back at the impassable mountain range to stop the deity of gods, they had lost dozens of aircrafts to suppress the enemy's horde of devil beasts. But this time, other than a few unmanned gun turrets, the over 200 devil beasts did not cause any losses to the humans. It's time for our enemies to have a headache. Edith sneered. It could be seen that she had been brooding over the deity of gods using a method of self-destruction to destroy the humans. Now that she was able to use the same method to retaliate, it made her tone of voice much happier. They will probably use even more troops to launch a counterattack against us, Iron Axe said in a deep voice. They might even send out a new senior lord rank senior demon. Roland silently recalled the information regarding the senior lords. According to Valkyries, other than Silent Disaster, the demon known as the Blood Conqueror was the most adept at attacking. However, the latter was a lord of hell, and was more suited for ground battles. After all, not a single devil beast could withstand its massive body. Now that he thought about it, the Demon King's decision to hand the Western Front to Hacksword was truly a fortunate thing. Regardless of what methods they use, we will accompany them to the end. But they don't have much time left. Roland looked at the map. The final distance of 250 kilometers was marked with a red line. The Eleanor battleship only had 3 days left to reach the decisive battle. Chapter 1471. It's all because of Hacksword's betrayal. Honorable King, please allow me to kill it. Within the presiding Holy See, Sanguine's roar was deafening. From the protruding veins on his head and the hot air spewing out of his mouth, it was obvious that he was truly enraged. The other senior lords also had rather gloomy expressions. Only Nasapel remained expressionless, and even had the urge to laugh. What a bunch of fools. He had clearly warned them. But apart from undeserved, the other senior lords were skeptical that Silent Disaster would collude with Sky Lord and take the initiative to attack him. Even after he displayed his memories to the king, the senior lords only suppressed their doubts on the surface. Deep down, they were still suspecting if he had angered the other party. It was only because he looked like a monster that was assembled. But in the end, they did not receive an explanation from Hacksword and Syracuse. Instead, they received the human's deity of gods. Don't you think it's a little too late to blame the traitors for this? The problem is, can you find where he is? Undeserved did not care about Sanguine's reputation. Hacksword could be hiding in any corner of the ridge of the continent, and the people of Sky City might have been forced to side with him. Under such circumstances, without investing large amounts of manpower, it's impossible to find traces of a senior lord. Besides, he coldly swept his gaze at him. Even if you find Hacksword, don't forget that Syracuse is by his side. When the time comes, it's still unknown who will be killed. You. If they weren't in the presiding Holy See, Sanguine would have already taken action. Honorable King, I still don't understand. Chaos squirmed his plump body and said, did the humans really discover any evidence regarding divine will? If not, with Sky City's style, how could he and the humans? They have already done so much, and you're still guessing the reason for their betrayal. Mask interrupted sternly. Regardless of the reason, Hacksword had plenty of opportunities to report to the king. But in reality, from the moment he left the Western Front to the Bottomless Land to collude with Silent Disaster, he had never contacted King City. Clearly, this was a planned betrayal. If not for my ability achieving a new breakthrough, I would have long died in Syracuse's hands. The other great monarchs were speechless. This was a memory fragment extracted by the king, so it could not be faked. Hacksword had once wandered around the northern end of the Land of Dawn, which was also confirmed by the sentries along the way. No matter how one looked at it, it did not seem like a decision made in a hurry. That's right, that's it. The corners of Nasapel's lips curled up slightly. Memories could not be forged, but he could deliberately erase a portion of them during the transfer. And he had chosen to hide the clues regarding Valkyries, and what he had reported to the king was the altered body. As it turned out, it was a wise move. If the other Grand Monarchs discovered that their betrayal might involve the missing Valkyries, the situation would only become more complicated. In that case, the date of obtaining the human's legacy shard might have to be delayed again. It did not want to waste any more time. Mask is right. Let's focus on the humans' floating island first. They're obviously here for King City. Undeserved volunteered. The enemy is floating in midair and surrounded by firearms. It's not suitable for Blood Conqueror and Lord Deathscar. No matter how I thought about it, I was the only one suitable to stop them. Undeserved, like Abomination and Deathscar, had advanced from a psionic warlock. However, compared to the Mind Controller, who was strong in confusion and control, he was more inclined towards close combat. This could be seen from his attire. His basic humanoid appearance was wrapped in a tight-fitting black leather coat. He did not have a single piece of armor on his body, making him look like a sharp blade that had given up on defense. The two curved horns that protruded from the side of his forehead seemed to be the only difference between him and a human. However, Nasapel knew that it was only a disguise. Undeserved could actively distort the perception of the surrounding life forms. This was a mimicry ability that was stronger than the Transformer. He had experienced it before, and when he walked past Undeserved, his subconscious had treated the other party as a rock, causing him to not be alarmed at all. This seems like a feasible choice, or rather a choice made out of helplessness. If I'm not around, Mask thought. The situation of a war could never be changed by an assassin. The king would not agree to his request. Denied. Indeed, the king's first sentence was a denial. Furthermore, Nasapel did not know if it was a misperception, but he felt that the king's tone was even colder than before. Killing the commander will at most cause chaos, but replacing the commander will easily expose yourself. The humans possess witches that can detect magic power, and at the same time, we cannot eliminate the possibility of a large number of anti-magic carriers. Your success rate is only 3%, and your chance of escaping is less than 1%. It can be said to be a meaningless risk. But the other senior lords. The race does not only have senior lords to fight. High-level ascendants are similarly not to be underestimated. The human floating island uses the Western region's god's stone pillars. They are unable to implement Plan B like the deity of gods. In the end, they still have to rely on their own strength. Your Majesty is wise. Mask spread his arms wide open. In fact, I have already studied the insectoids' combat tactics. Those iron birds seem difficult to deal with, but in reality, they are extremely weak. As long as they dare to appear in the sky above King City, I will definitely teach them a lesson they will never forget. Even the core instrument was snatched away by the insectoids. How trustworthy can your words be? Deathscar said coldly. If not for Silent Disaster taking action first, how could I have lost control of the deity of gods? Mask did not even look at him. The Western Front has already proven the potential of the symbiotic demons. What I need to do is to expand the scope of its usage. Even if they do not fly, they are still a huge threat to the iron birds. Permission granted. But do not take up too much of the frontline's resources. The king replied curtly. That is only natural. Mask struck while the iron was hot. In addition, I have a new idea. If magic power is channeled out in an orderly manner, allowing it to be released in its original form, we might be able to obtain an extremely powerful weapon of war. But this research requires the use of magic power cores. Can I give it a try? There are excess cores in King's City. You can try to test out the new idea, but you are not to interfere with the core operations of the Birth Tower. Yes, Your Majesty. Mask lowered his head. The presiding Holy See gradually faded away, and the majestic body of King's City's stone tower reappeared before his eyes. What was different from the past was that there were a few more eyes above the Black Tower, as though they were constantly watching the city below. That was the king. In terms of magic power, even 10 of himself could not compare. In the past, he would not even have the thought of looking at the king. But now, Mask adjusted his mask, turned around, and walked towards the hatchery. The king was just a part of the core. Chapter 1472. As they drew closer to the King's City of Demons, the attacks on the floating island grew fiercer. From once a day in the beginning, to once every few hours now. The second wave would appear on the horizon before the previous wave had ended. Only after nightfall would the floating island welcome a moment of peace. All unfinished projects and ground facilities had basically come to a halt, and the construction team had focused all their manpower and energy on repairing the runway. But in the face of the enemy's tidal wave of attacks, Roland did not dare to let the aerial knight pursue them, leaving all the pressure on Eleanor. Another change was the rapid increase in the number of senior demons. Among them, there were those that excelled in physical strength, and there were also those with strange and unpredictable abilities. The loss of the drone turrets further increased the pressure on the defense. On the second afternoon, the enemy broke into the inner part of the floating island for the first time. After several senior demons used magic blades to cut open the sealed gate, Eleanor immediately sent out an intrusion alert. The gods' punishment witches, armed to the teeth, formed the second line of defense, and both sides engaged in a slaughter in the narrow passageway. This scene was similar to the battlefield that the Union had set up centuries ago, except that the positions of both sides had been swapped. In Alice's vision, the gods' punishment witches were the tip of the spear that pierced into the demon's camp, the key to destroying the obelisk and the matrix. Only by crushing the enemies as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood would humans have any hope of victory. But on the floating island, the demons had become the aggressors, and the gods' punishment witches only needed to stop their advance. But their strength did not decrease because of this. In a sense, the gods' punishment witches were the nemesis of high-level enemies. The demons with their abilities sealed found it difficult to gain any advantage against a group of extraordinary and ancient witches who did not fear pain. Furthermore, they were armed with guns. Thus, even though they were at an absolute disadvantage in terms of numbers, they were still able to stop the enemy from entering the core region. At the same time, traces of the demon army appeared on the ground, most of which were spider-shaped monstrous beasts. At first, there were a few scattered about, but now, they had gathered into a small patch of black puddles. It's like ants waiting for corpses. Agatha looked at the scene below the floating island and muttered. If we fall, they will definitely swarm us and tear us to pieces. More demons are on their way. It seems like the enemy wants to surround us. In the past, the Union wanted to defeat the demons with an army of transcendence, but now it seems that it was too naive. Yes, even without Mask and his army of symbiotic demons, the Union won't be able to handle this number. The Ice Witch closed her eyes. We've underestimated the battle of divine will. But at least you guys still have hope. Roland patted her shoulder comfortingly. No matter what the outcome of the Witch Empire was, after experiencing 2 complete defeats for the humans, they still retain the spark of resistance instead of completely giving up. This alone was very difficult. Your Majesty. At this moment, Philin walked over with the latest report. The route of the floating city has changed. It seems to be turning towards us. Who is the presenter? It's Miss Lightning from the exploration group. She also said that the other party has expanded the Devil Beast's patrol range. She and Maggie are no longer able to continue monitoring the area. Finally, Miss Lightning mentioned that there is an extremely astonishing magic power overflowing from the bottom of King's City. Even though she isn't proficient in sensing magic power, she could sense the scorching aura. Roland could not help but exchange glances with Agatha. What do you think it is? I don't know. The latter shook her head. But for the magic power to be condensed to such a degree, it's definitely not something simple. That's what I thought. Roland agreed. Isn't it surprising? Symbiotic demons, high-grade mass production, deity of gods. The demons had produced an endless stream of new things in the past 100 years. Even when the Battle of Divine Will began, they were still using ordinary bone spears. But now they had already switched to explosive enhancements, although not every mad demon had one. Even if they didn't use human gunpowder, they were definitely inspired by it. In the past, people often said that war was the best catalyst for civilization. And from the looks of it, there was some truth to it. Roland looked up at the dusky sky. God, is this what you wish to see? Without a doubt, if they were to continue advancing against the attacks, they had no chance of victory. At that moment, the floating island was like a boat sailing against the current, and the surging black water was like thousands of demons. If the number of enemies multiplied by a few times, there would definitely be a large number of casualties on the island. Furthermore, from the powerful magic power surging out of King's City and the fact that they had taken the initiative to approach, they should be hiding more than one trump card for the decisive battle. However, from the very beginning, he had never thought of fighting to the death with the other party. The location of the floating island on the map was a little short of the red line, but since the demons were willing to shorten the distance, he could save some effort. Inform everyone to gather in the conference room. Roland instructed Philin. It's time. Everyone in the command center stopped what they were doing and looked in his direction. The room immediately became extremely quiet. Yes, Your Majesty. The knight puffed out his chest and saluted. A few minutes later, the higher-ups gathered on the top floor of the bridge. The setting sun was slowly sinking into the earth, and the skyline appeared blood-red. The demons' corpses lying on the landing pad added a sense of desolation to the afterglow. Tonight, the enemies will enter our final attack range. Roland looked at the participants. They were divided into 2 rows around the long table. On one side were the witches, Anna, Vendi, Agatha, Phyllis, and on the other side were the military commanders, Ironax, Edith, Brian, Philin. Every pair of eyes was filled with silent trust. Even if the enemies were as overwhelming as dark clouds, not a single one of them showed any signs of retreating or feeling uneasy. I don't think this plan needs to be repeated. From the moment it was born, everyone has been involved and witnessed the entire process of its creation. Roland said slowly, although I'm the one who came up with the plan, it won't become a reality without everyone's joint efforts. Prototype production, parameter calculation, configuration selection, airdrop test. Even with the assistance of the Design Bureau of Greycastle, he followed the procedures step by step to complete the entire set of tests from experimental product to weapon in service, so that there would be no accidents in actual combat. In order to minimize the chances of being discovered and avoid unnecessary losses on the way, the fleet will set off at around 5 in the morning. Flying at night is full of risks, but I believe that Tilly can lead the Air Knight to achieve this. If everything goes well, there will be a new sun on the horizon tomorrow morning. Seeing that no one in the conference room had any objections, Roland stood up and said, "Then, I announce the official launch of the Glory of the Sun plan." He paused and said, "Remember, the darkest moment is before dawn." Chapter 1473. 12 o'clock a.m. The lights in the hangar were brightly lit. All the stones of lighting had been gathered here. Other than providing illumination, a portion of them would be installed on the planes to supplement the lack of light sources. For this operation, the Air Knight would be deployed in full force. The 200-plus planes were not only Neverwinter's entire air force, but also the hope of all humans. Hundreds of ground crew members pushed carts to and fro the hangar, inspecting the condition of every plane, with Anna taking the lead. Her hair was tied up and she wore boots. Her appearance in work attire left a deep impression on everyone and caused the atmosphere to soar. Roland was no exception. Her greasy cheeks and sapphire-clear eyes were deeply imprinted in his mind. 1:30 a.m. After the inspection of the planes, they began refueling. All the exhaust fans were operating at full power to reduce the amount of oil in the air, as there was not a high requirement for lighting, and to reduce the risk of fire. This step was arranged to be carried out in both the hangar and the ground landing area. Among the ground planes, the most eye-catching ones were the two single-winged four-engine bombers. Even though it had shrunk considerably, its size was still spectacular. Its wingspan of over 30 meters and pitch-black paint made it stand out like a crane in a flock of chickens. Replacing the Phoenix's engine meant that it could only fly with base oil, but in exchange, it was a reliable and mature airframe. Because of this, the engineering department was able to snatch the two bombers before the implementation of the plan. Of course, its eye-catching aspect was not only its big aspect. The First Army and the God's Punishment witches were closely guarding its belly also showed that it was different from the others. Even though most of them had not seen the weapon that they had placed their hopes on, it did not prevent them from knowing that these two bombers would be the key to deciding the outcome of the battle. 3:00 a.m. The Air Knight gathered together for the last round of route review. Remember, there is nothing in the night that can guide you. The stars in the sky will confuse your vision, and the light on the ground will be the enemy's bonfire. Tilly stood on the podium and said loudly, "The only thing you can trust is the flashing tail lights of the planes in front of you. Open your eyes wide and look at the position of your teammates. Once you leave the floating island, there is no possibility of turning back. If everything goes smoothly, we will arrive at the designated area at dawn. After that, the two bombers will drop their bombs one after another. During this process, your mission is to protect the main attacker and shoot down any enemy that tries to get close, whether it's a devil beast or a senior demon. Listen carefully. Due to the time difference between the two bombs and the huge power of the bombs, remember not to get too close to the target. In addition, regardless of the outcome, the fleet had to return immediately. His Majesty allowed for failure, but he would not allow humanity's forces to be buried in a battle. As long as the sky still belongs to us, hope will never end. Go and write a new history of mankind. I will be with you in this operation." "Yes, Your Highness," everyone shouted in unison. 3:50 a.m. To be honest, I'm a little nervous. Beside the Phoenix's gangway, Roland saw Tilly's trembling hands. This was the first time he had seen her reveal such an unsteady expression. At this time, there was only half an hour left before the scheduled takeoff time. 200 carrier-based aircrafts in another world could also support 4 to 5 waves of attacks. They had to take off in advance and form a formation to ensure that there would not be too many people left behind in the subsequent long-distance raid. "Are you afraid?" "Perhaps." She first nodded before shaking her head. "But I think it's more of anticipation. Brother, do you still remember our promise? Just thinking about how that day is about to come makes me unable to control my emotions. Once the Battle of Divine will end it, ashes would return to the world." This was the belief that had supported her until now. "Ah, I remember," Roland said gently, "but the prerequisite is that you return safely. Only then can you prove that I did not lie to you." Tilly raised her head. "Brother, can you hug me?" He slowly extended his hand and pulled her petite body into his embrace. The latter naturally fell forward and rested her forehead on his chest. It was as though time had returned to a year ago, when she cried in his embrace. After a moment, Tilly's breathing stabilized. "I'm setting off." She took 2 steps back. "Go." She boarded the cockpit, pulled down the cabin cover, and opened her mouth to Roland. From the shape of her mouth, it was "thank you." The gangway was removed and the propellers began to spin. 4:20 a.m. Gates 1 to 10 of the floating islands were opened, and the biplane formation flew out of the mothership. Sylvie used her magic eye to monitor the situation, reminding the planes that might fall behind or deviate from the airspace to return to the right track. Under the pitch-black night sky, more than 200 aircrafts circled around the Eleanor cruiser like a group of fireflies. This was also the stage where accidents were most likely to occur. Without radar guidance and night vision equipment, the pilots would not be able to distinguish between the sky and the land. And with so many aircrafts taking off, the erratic flight path lights would also cause confusion for the Air Knight. if not for Lightning and Maggie, under Sylvie's instructions, knocking on the glass window to warn everyone before the problem occurred, many aircrafts would have been lost during the formation. 4:55 a.m. Through the radio, Roland gave the order for the battle to begin. The Seagull and Phoenix, as the leaders of the fleet, were the first to ascend. Following closely behind were two bombers. They were given the names Koan Peng and Peace Ark respectively, and were also the core of the two formations. Behind them was the escort formation formed by the Fire of Heaven and Fury of Heaven. Although they were divided into two formations, it was only for the convenience of night navigation. For this operation, any bomber was of utmost importance and could not be lost. The last to leave were Lightning and Maggie. The two of them waved goodbye to Roland in front of the podium and flew into the night. Together with Xavi, Vendi, Andrea, Sylvie, and the others on the Seagull, it could be said that humanity had invested all their air power in this battle. Soon, the massive fleet was swallowed by the night and disappeared without a trace. Roland looked in the direction where everyone had left, unwilling to leave his line of sight for a long time. Even if you don't believe in God, the only thing you can do at this time is to pray. Nightingale sighed softly. He nodded his head indiscernibly. This was probably the thought of all the remaining personnel. They had already done everything they could. What followed was a difficult and anxious wait, for the moment when their fate was decided. Fortunately, we don't have to wait for too long. Anna looked at the black skyline. The sky will be bright soon. Chapter 1474. Good gripped the control stick tightly as he stared at the front of the cockpit. It's too dark. The sky, the clouds, and the ground. Apart from the fixed lights, he could not see anything. Because he had stared for too long, even the taillights seemed to have turned illusory. Was he really moving? Or were they still in the same spot? Good removed his blindfold and rubbed his sore eyes. Only then did he notice that his gloves were sticky. I'm actually sweating. When was the last time something like this happened? He probably had to trace it back to when he watched the magic movie. He took 2 deep breaths and silently recited His Majesty's words. It's the darkest before dawn. Let's chat, or I'll suffocate to death. For a moment, Good seemed to have heard his own thoughts. However, he quickly realized that it was Finkin who had sent him a message through the team channel. Hey, using the radio to chat is against the rules. Another familiar voice sounded. It was Heinz. Her Highness has stipulated that we cannot use the radio to chat during battle as it might interfere with important information. We haven't even entered the battlefield yet. Devil beasts can't fly at night, Finkin replied. Besides, I'm using the formation channel, so it won't reach Her Highness's ears. There was a brief silence in the earpiece. Alright, I have to admit, it's good to hear someone talking. Another person joined in. Buddy, what do you want to chat about? Anything. Why don't you all count how many taillights you can see? Honestly speaking, I can't even tell which are the lights and which are the stars. That's right, anything is fine. I can see 6 big ones. I have 4. Then you should be at the flank of the formation. Be careful not to get lost. Soon the channel became lively. It was clear that flying without knowing where they were, or where they were heading was extremely stressful for everyone. At the very least, they were able to see the fog when they flew through the clouds, and even if they were to deviate, they could still return alone. But this time, not only was it difficult to detect their movements, once they left the formation, it was impossible to find Eleanor Skyscraper Island in the dark with their naked eyes. Hearing the chatter of his teammates, Good unknowingly relaxed. How is it? Does chatting like this make you feel more relaxed? Suddenly, Princess Royal Highness's voice cut in, and almost instantly, the channel became silent. There was no doubt that someone had reported the situation in the channel to His Highness. Your Highness, this is all my fault. Good bit the bullet and said. No, I mean if it's effective, I can chat with you for a while. Tilly did not seem to blame him at all. But don't forget to keep an eye on your teammates. Don't cause trouble for Lightning and Maggie. Everyone was stunned for a moment before cheering. Yes, sir. I promise I won't lose sight of the target. Your Highness, don't worry. I can feel my eyes brightening up. Come on, You have to use the gray castle method to flatter me. Do you think you're a now? Amidst the roars of laughter, even the bombing crew joined in. Your Highness, this is Kuenpeng. Can I ask you a question? We have the glory of the sun in the bomb bay, right? But why was it different from the one next door? Their one looks big and round, while ours is like a barrel. Good realized that this was definitely a question that would leave his name in history. Because yours was made in a hurry by the Ministry of Engineering, using a simpler structure. In terms of power, although it's not as good as the one next door, it's enough to break the first layer of the enemy's defense. Tilly explained, but then again His Majesty seemed to be unexpectedly satisfied with this result. He even said it was a historical coincidence or something. Your Highness, I don't quite understand. It's right that you don't understand. The Princess Royal's voice suddenly became very soft. He's such a strange person. Time seemed to flow faster. Even the endless darkness in front of them was not as unbearable as before. After an unknown period of time, a surprised voice drowned out everyone's conversation. Look to your right. Good looked in that direction. After a moment, he noticed that there was an additional gray in the chaos. It was mixed in with the darkness, and it was difficult for ordinary people to see the difference. But its appearance was like a spread of dye, causing the unchanging night sky to undergo a change. Affected by the gray, the edge of the sky was suffused with a tinge of purplish blue. It was a sign of dawn. Concentrate, Tilly shouted. We are almost there. At the same time, inside the seagull, through the darkness, Sylvie had already captured the approximate location of the deity of gods. To prevent herself from being discovered by the thousand-eyed demon, she had restricted the range of her ability to a high altitude, and only paid attention to the fleet's route. Only when it was close to dawn did she carefully cast her gaze towards the ground. It was proven that, be it in the early stages of the flight route calculation or the later stages of implementation, everyone had completed their tasks extremely well. In less than a quarter of an hour, she sensed the astonishing magic power emanating from the deity of gods outside her field of vision. As the distance closed, the gigantic fortress that was completely surrounded by black stone walls finally entered her field of vision. At that moment, the gigantic prism floating in midair was in a stationary state. Probably to conserve magic power, it was only a few dozen meters above the ground. Behind it, there were densely packed troops, the length of which alone was more than a few kilometers. A heaven-sent opportunity. She realized that the deity of gods would stop advancing after nightfall, probably to allow the ground troops to keep up. With such a massive target completely stationary, it was almost impossible for the bombs to miss. More importantly, it was not yet dawn, and there were almost no patrolling devil beasts in the outer perimeter. This allowed them to seize the initiative in their first attack. Sylvie picked up the microphone and relayed the target's data to the bombing crew as she continued to observe the enemy's formation. Under her wide spherical field of vision, the overall situation of the battlefield was gradually revealed. At the highest altitude of 7,000 meters were two bombers, which required a long time for the devil beasts to ascend. Meanwhile, in the middle at an altitude of 2,005 to 3,000 meters, was a biplane formation. They would construct an airtight blocking net. With the deity of gods less than 10 kilometers away from the fleet, it would take at most a few minutes for the Kuenpeng to launch its first bomb. But at this moment, a strange high-level demon barged into her field of vision. Even though they were separated by such a long distance, their eyes met, and the demon abruptly stopped moving, raising its head and standing in the air. It's the eye demon, it saw us. Sylvie's heart skipped a beat. Although she knew that the number of eye demons would not be small when the demons migrated, and that it was only a matter of time before they were discovered, she still felt her heart skip a beat when the moment truly arrived. It's already too late to realize it. She activated the sigil of listening and transmitted a message to Tilly. The bombers are about to enter the dropping position, take note to evade. Roger that. Right, the demons have also noticed the fleet. She pretended to be relaxed as she instructed. Is that so? I've been waiting for a long time. After saying that, Tilly immediately turned on the team channel. Everyone pay attention. Turn 10 degrees to the right, and prepare to receive the impact. The massive biplane swarm immediately began to change direction. Meanwhile, at this time, the gray color of the horizon had already gradually turned to white. The color of the entire dome was still extremely dark, but at least it was no longer pitch black to the point where one couldn't even see their own fingers in front of them, but a deep blue that was almost black. The stars grew dimmer, and the light on the wings became more obvious. The only one that did not turn was the Kuanpeng. It had to maintain stability before the bomb was launched. Unlike the Fury of Heaven that could dive and bomb, the Kuanpeng and the Ark of Peace were special planes that were specially designed for bombing from the very beginning. They were fully equipped with bomb sights and the cabin was pressurized, allowing them to fly at a much higher altitude than the average biplane. Although visibility was poor at night and there were thin clouds below, with the accurate data provided by Sylvie, observation was no longer as important. The bomber did a simple calculation of the flight path and gestured to the captain that they could launch the bomb. Open the hold launch. As the control lever was pulled up, a muffled sound came from the bottom of the fuselage. It was the sound of the heavy bomb separating from the hangar. When this 4-ton behemoth landed, the bomber jerked upwards and swayed twice before regaining its stability. The bomb had already turned into an inconspicuous black dot and accelerated towards the deity of gods under the pull of gravity. Chapter 1475. Deity of Gods, King City. Mask, who possessed many heads, did not require a long period of sleep, or it could be said that as long as the resting time of each head was staggered, he could remain awake for long periods of time. Therefore, the moment the demon guards noticed the anomaly, he received an alert. The enemy is here. The king's unperturbed consciousness transmitted over from the night. There was no doubt that the lowlifes were using the night to avoid the devil beast's detection. But what could the few iron birds do? Did they think that I was unprepared? I'm urging those bogle fools to get up, but I still need some time. Undeserved's reaction was clearly slower, but compared to the other pitiful fellows who only had one head, he was already extremely vigilant. It doesn't matter if it's a little later. Nasapel took out the mini-core. I've said it before, I've already studied the Iron Bird's combat methods. Esteemed king, leave these annoying lowlifes to me. Under his magic powers control, the black stone walls that formed the dome of King City extended out many crystal branches. They were originally a portion of the first-generation symbiotic demons, but after his special modifications, they no longer shot out crystal needles, but were instead a special type of miniature symbiotic demons. After a few exchanges, he had already noticed a glaring flaw in the Iron Birds, the mechanical creations that the humans called Heaven's Fury or Heaven's Fire. Even though they were faster than the bogle beasts, they were unable to change their direction as agilely as the latter. The faster they were, the more obvious it was. Their flight trajectories were in a smooth arc, and they were unable to even roll when diving. This meant that at a specific point in time, they had to pass through a specific location. In other words, as long as the height of the needles was determined in advance, the symbiotic demon's chances of hitting the Iron Birds would be greatly increased. Of course, the crystal needles themselves were unable to achieve this, but by changing the train of thought, turning the projectiles into symbiotic demons that could independently determine the situation made everything much easier. These needles would automatically explode when they approached the Iron Birds, turning into a group of symbiotic demons that could temporarily float. Once they landed on the Iron Birds, they would act like parasites, tearing and gnawing at the target's fragile outer shell. Mask believed that this defense system would definitely leave a deep impression on the ambushers. But through the demon guards, the human's subsequent reaction surprised him. The mechanical Iron Birds did not attack the deity of gods while the devil beasts were still in the air. Instead, they collectively turned south, as though they were deliberately avoiding King City. What did that mean? Are the Zergs going to give up? They ran away. Looks like your toys won't be of any use. Wu Wang snorted lightly. In the end, I still have to chase after the humans. No, it shouldn't be like this. Nasapel frowned. Although it referred to them as insects, the numerous battles it had fought proved that these demonic bodies did not lack courage. Since the other party had taken the risk to plan this night voyage, why would they cower at the critical moment and retreat before the battle even started? Currently, the Eye Demon Guards could only sense one source of vision, which meant that most of the worms had yet to see the deity of gods. While the night restricted the enemy, it also weakened the Eye Demon Guard's senses. Could it be that this group of iron birds wasn't the main attacking force of the humans? A bolt of lightning flashed in his mind as he controlled all the Eye Demon Guards to look at the surrounding airspace of the deity of gods. This time, the Eye Demon Guards did not use magic power, but the visual abilities of the thousands of eyes. What are you doing? Wu Wang immediately protested in dissatisfaction. Mask did not have the time to explain. At that moment, all his brains were connected to the Eye Demon Guards. After a while, he finally sensed something amiss in the vast night sky. He saw an inconspicuous black metal flying towards the deity of gods. Its size was much smaller than the iron birds, and it was almost impossible to distinguish it from the dark blue background. The cylindrical object immediately made Mask think of the explosives that the Fury of Heaven Roars had previously thrown. But did the humans make such a big fuss just for this? Even so, Nasapel still ordered his subordinates to activate the magic power barrier. It was also at this moment that an extremely bright flame bloomed in the sky. This was also the last scene he saw through the Eye Demon Guards. The beam of light lasted for less than a blink of an eye before all the Eye Demon Guards severed their connection with him. What was left in his mind was an extremely scorching pain and a white light. He could not help but growl. But this was not the end. The deity of gods seemed to be pushed by something as the city within it trembled violently. The dome let out a sharp wail as the ground collapsed. Nasapel felt his feet sink as though he was floating. Tilly did not see the moment of the explosion. Even though she had prepared a pair of black sunglasses, it was extremely unlikely for her to catch a glimpse of the explosive thrown from a height of 7,000 meters with her naked eyes. Furthermore, wearing sunglasses made her already terrible vision pitch black. After a few attempts, she gave up on the idea. Hence, when the world lit up, Tilly realized what had happened. At that moment, her back was facing the deity of gods. In an instant, the wings of the plane were illuminated with a dazzling radiance. Even the rivets on them could be seen clearly. As for the parts that protruded out of the plane, a striking shadow was pulled out. In the past, only the first rays of dawn could illuminate the silhouette of all things in the night sky, causing the darkness to shrink back. Tilly took a deep breath and tilted her head. A gigantic fireball appeared hundreds of meters above the deity of gods. Even though its brightness was rapidly decreasing, it was still able to illuminate the floating fortress. Green smoke billowed out from the majestic black stone walls, as though it had been swept by a gust of air. But Tilly knew that it was not a gust of air, but a light that had reached a certain degree. It could produce an impact like a tangible object, and ignite easily flammable objects. At the same time, the fireball's exterior distorted as a ripple rapidly spread outwards. If not for the deity of gods serving as a backdrop, she would not have been able to see such a shocking scene. The ripple first collided with the floating fortress below, as though a gigantic palm had slammed onto a dusty wooden table. A large amount of dust was instantly stirred up, nearly covering the entire surface of the vertebral body. Following that was the other parts of the deity of gods, and finally the ground. From the sequence of the rising smoke, it was obvious that the ripple was not an illusion, but something real. It continued to expand after hitting the ground and pounced towards the fleet. Prepare to attack. Tilly raised the radio microphone and roared. Boom! At this moment, the earth-shattering explosion reached her ears. The silence of the night was finally broken. Accompanied by the rumbling, the plane trembled violently. At the same time, under the influence of the shockwave, the plane's body plummeted as though it had lost control, only stabilizing itself after a few seconds. The loud sound was like the ringing of a bell that split the heavens and earth, announcing the arrival of dawn. A ray of morning light shone across the mountain ridge and onto the land. The fireball had already turned into a yellowish-brown pillar of smoke. Its roots were deeply embedded into the deity of gods, while its top continued to rise, fusing with the layers of clouds. Tilly gave the command to change direction once again. When the fleet flew to the east, She finally saw the deity of gods shrouded in smoke and dust. Overall, it did not seem to be affected much. Compared to the trees that had fallen to the ground, it continued to hover steadily in midair. But the explosion did not leave it unscathed. The top of the obsidian pyramid that was faintly discernible in the smoke and dust had a huge hole. Chapter 1476. Cough cough. Cough. It took Nasapel a long time to crawl out of the rubble. If not for the enhanced body he had prepared for himself, the tremor would have taken his life. Damn it, what did those worms do? Although one life was nothing, he did not have the confidence to complete a soul transfer under the eyes of the king without being discovered. Before he completely obtained control over the core, he had to maintain his current image as much as possible. Only then could he lower the wariness of others. My king, are you all right? The dome of King's City had been damaged, and the magic barrier had been shattered. It would take an hour for it to recover. The king ordered stiffly. He had to take immediate measures. What was that bright light and loud noise? The Blood Conqueror's voice interjected. Why was I able to see what was happening behind me from Arietta? Where are the eye-demons? I can't contact the eye-demons. Undeserved was somewhat alarmed. Mask, what did you do? What did he do? Nasapel's heart suddenly surged with a nameless flame. Did these idiots who only had strength not realize that the humans were launching an unprecedented attack on the race? The brightness of the white light had reached an unbelievable level. Just looking directly at it could cause damage. Now most of his dozen or so heads were blind. Even the sun could not do this. As for the outcome of the eye-demons, it was obvious. For the first time, Mask did not disguise his emotions. The eye-demons were dead, so he could only use his own eyes to see. After he finished speaking coldly, he boarded the nearest levitating platform. Along the way, fragments of the dome continued to collapse, falling into the vast red mist lake. Although such damage was not enough to threaten the birth tower, ever since the establishment of King's City, it had never been invaded by enemies. This undoubtedly dealt a considerable blow to the race's psyche. When he climbed to the highest point of King's City, a scalding heatwave surged towards him. At the same time, the air was mixed with an unpleasant charred smell, as though a huge fire had occurred here. He clearly remembered that the location where the white light first appeared was not right next to the dome, but a few hundred meters in the sky. Even at such a long distance, it was still warm. This was beyond the scope of its understanding. After surveying his surroundings, Nasapel had a basic understanding of the overall situation. Without a doubt, that piece of black metal was the culprit behind everything. Not only did it create a huge gap in the dome, but it also destroyed most of the symbiotic defenses. Judging from the edges of the cracks, the outer shell of the city should have been crushed by some kind of great force. Although the crystal stone that formed the upper shell was not as sturdy as the birth tower, it was still protected by the magic barrier. The fact that a single blow had blasted a hole in it showed how powerful that thing was. Snow powder definitely wouldn't have such an effect. Even if the amount of snow powder was increased by 10 times, it still wouldn't be able to achieve such an effect. The weapons that the humans were using were obviously new inheritances, but the race didn't know anything about it. What made Mask's expression even uglier was that the iron birds did not take advantage of the situation to swoop down and attack the ground troops that had fallen into chaos. Instead, they turned around once again and had no intention of approaching. This thing. Could it be that there is more than one? It looked back at the tower and the surging red mist lake below the crack, and its heart sank to the bottom. Get all the bogle beasts to ascend into the sky. Don't get entangled by the iron bird in front of us. Go to a place as high as possible to investigate. Once you discover any abnormalities, report to me immediately. Mask shouted in his consciousness. Report to you? Nasapel, are you mistaken? The King's City's bogle beast army is my army. Undeserved said in an unfriendly tone. If not for the fact that he had yet to develop a symbiotic demon that could fly, he wouldn't have said such nonsense. Mask suppressed his anger and listened carefully. The humans' main offensive force isn't the iron birds, but something else. He recalled the scene from before. That thing should have flown very high, and the weapons it carried should have dropped from a high altitude and exploded at a specific height. Due to its immense power, the iron birds had been lingering in the periphery. Their goal was not to attack the deity of gods, but to protect the main attacker. You have to quickly find it and destroy it, or we will be finished. Finished? You mean by the humans? Undeserved was stunned. Quickly go and intercept that army. Only you can do that. Mask then turned his consciousness to the core of the race. King, please allow me to move the deity of gods. We can't stay here any longer. If this goes on, we will be treated as targets by the humans. He originally thought that he would have to spend some effort to convince the king to avoid the humans, but he never expected the king to quickly give instructions. You are temporarily in charge of King City's control. You have to destroy the invaders. This is a deduction that is completely based on reason and is detached from my emotions. Mask lowered his head towards the birth tower. Yes, my king. Ever since the king fused with the core instrument, it became more and more to his liking. Perhaps, in another 100 years, the king would truly understand his philosophy. What a pity. If not for the presiding holy see being so terrifying, he might not have been so thorough. Mask raised the mini-core high up and poured all his magic power into it. The deity of gods let out a boom and rose without any warning, flying towards the pillar of smoke in the sky. With full control, he no longer needed to inform his subordinates. Just the core in his hands was enough to make the entire king city operate according to his wishes. The sudden movement of the floating island would undoubtedly bring danger to the people in the city. For example, the unlucky ones walking along the cliff walls would fall into a bottomless pit and be smashed to pieces. But this was no longer a problem that Nasapel needed to consider. If the black bomb were to fall into the dome, the situation would truly be irreversible. Discovered a large number of devil beasts ascending into the sky. I repeat, discovered a large number of devil beasts ascending into the sky. They're coming for us. This is Flight 6. Lads, spread out and prepare to meet the enemy. After the morning light lit up the sky, the aerial knight no longer needed to rely on the taillights to guide the way. However, the scenery that bathed in the golden morning light was not all beautiful. Other than the blossoming cloud of smoke, a large number of black dots appeared in everyone's vision. They surged out from the deity of gods like a swarm of aggressive wasps. Ark of Peace, what's the situation now? Tilly asked loudly. The calculations have been completed. We are about to enter the bomb formation. Previously, in order to confirm the situation of the explosion, the bomber team had spent quite a bit of time. Due to the outer shell of the Demon's King City, in order to unleash the full might of the second internal explosion bomb, they had to get as close to the source of the red mist as possible. Even though Sylvie had calculated the new airdrop parameters at the first instance, the error caused by the airdrop at an altitude of 7,000 meters had exceeded the range of the crack. Therefore, the Ark's crew had taken the initiative to lower the altitude by 1,500 meters to ensure that the bomb could fly into the city. Ark of Peace is preparing to launch. All crew, prepare to defend against impact. Tens of seconds later, a report came from the radio. Chapter 1477. On the Ark of Peace, Eagleface, who was about to pull up the gate, retracted his hand. Direction: 9 degrees to the east, they are heading towards the smoke pillar. Instructor, what do we do next? The main pilot asked. With the size of the deity of gods, it was impossible to avoid the aerial bombardment even if it moved. Furthermore, the magic power barrier had already lost its effect. As long as the second glory of the sun landed near the black stone pyramid, there was a high chance of destroying the obelisk. Furthermore, it was the safest method for the flight crew. But he didn't board the plane for safety's sake. The pilots of the two bombers were chosen from outstanding cadets, with the only pilot being an instructor. The goal was obvious. The former was the key to flying the plane well, while the pilots were the guarantee to complete the mission. A high chance of success meant that there was a chance of failure. What he wanted was to abandon the part where he had to resign himself to fate and do what he could control to the extreme. The general staff had discussed the possibility of the deity of gods shifting between the two attacks, to the point that it had been moving from the beginning. There was only one solution, and that was to exchange altitude for accuracy until the enemy could no longer avoid it. Descend by 2,000 meters and recalculate the trajectory. Eagle Face ordered without hesitation. We will follow them wherever they run to. At this moment, the devil beasts had already collided with the swooping planes. Good felt the sky darken, as though the first rays of dawn had been swallowed by the curtain of night once again. Be it above or below, there were enemies everywhere. The fury of heaven's cannons spat out dazzling streams of light, which was the only thing that made him feel at ease. By aiming or slightly straightening the cannons and firing, any devil beast that blocked their path would be torn to pieces. Individual skills were meaningless in a battle of such a scale. Even if he were to observe his surroundings, it was impossible for him to discover every enemy that was charging at him. If not for his teammates protecting him, he would have been struck by the bone spears flying everywhere. After 3 volleys of fire, Good felt his eyes light up and realized that he had penetrated through the horde of devil beasts. When he turned around, not a single enemy was chasing after him. What are the demons doing? They don't seem to be paying attention to us. Finkin, who had been following him from the side, also noticed this. Good piloted the plane to increase the distance between them. Suddenly he knew something was wrong. Overall, only a few of the devil beasts in the sky were fighting with the air knight. The rest were trying their best to climb higher. Logically speaking, the demons should not have been able to detect the bombers flying above the clouds. As it turned out, they really didn't find their target. Although the other party was climbing, the route he took was varied, giving the impression that he was bumping around blindly. Damn it, the demons are looking for the Ark. Good roared into the radio. Isn't that a good thing? Finkin whistled. Judging by their flying speed, it will take a lot of effort to catch them. We can also take the opportunity to kill a few more to help His Highness relieve some pressure. Even so, Good still felt uneasy in his heart. Another group of enemies is coming. His teammates reminded him. Let's go to the clouds first. It's more suitable for a war of attrition. At an altitude of more than 4,000 meters, the devil beasts can hardly even flap their wings. We can cut off their tips layer by layer like shaving their heads. That sounds like a good idea. I'm going to climb up first. More than 10 biplanes took off one after another and flew into the sky. However, Good did not follow. He tuned the radio to the team's frequency and spoke to Finkin alone. We'll stay in this airspace. What? Stay here? If the enemies suddenly give up on their search, we'll be the first to be beaten up. His old comrade immediately questioned. Besides, if we don't take advantage of this opportunity, won't we let others take all the credit? That's not the point. What's more important is the demon's actions. Good explained while staring at the battlefield. Think about it. Since they can guess the existence of the bomber, do you think they realized that the attack just now was actually from an inconspicuous bomb? No way. The demons don't know about the existence of the Glory of the Sun plan, nor did they discover our attack in advance. It only took them a few minutes to drop the bomb and detonate it. How could they know so clearly? I'm not sure, but I think it's not a coincidence that the floating city is moving toward the smoke column, Good murmured. Most people would think that it was a dust cloud formed by the explosion. They would not be able to avoid it in time, let alone approach it. If the demons did it on purpose, the time when the bomb fell would be their last chance to fight back. All right, Finkin replied helplessly after a moment of silence. Since you said so, I'll believe you this time. But if I lose any battle achievements because of this, you have to compensate me. How about a month's worth of chaos drinks? There's no need for that. Just introduce your sister to me. Snap. The sound of the communication being cut off came from the earpiece. Finkin smiled and turned to fly towards Good. Damn it, these guys are really hard to deal with. Undeserved steered the stone of flight as he frantically dodged the cluster of bullets that were shot at him. According to Mask, being hit by this gadget was no different from being hit by a hammer. The magic barrier could not withstand it for long either. Since Silent Disaster had suffered from human firearms before, he naturally had no intention of experiencing it for himself. With his abilities, It was easy for him to interfere with the senses of ordinary humans. Even if the other party was wearing a god stone of retaliation, he could more or less affect the other party. But the one who targeted him was a witch. What made Undeserved even more uncomfortable was that the witch did not seem to have any intention of using magic to decide the outcome of the battle. She was piloting a blood-red iron bird, and would not approach within 900 feet of him. Although she said that she would run after firing a shot, not only was she extremely agile, her accuracy was not bad either. She immediately put him in a passive situation where he could not catch up or shake her off. It was a great humiliation to him that a magic user did not rely on their own magic, but relied on external objects to fight. Furthermore, there seemed to be more than one of such fellows. For example, the god stone bullets that shot down from the clouds from time to time were clearly from the hands of the witch. If not for his heightened sensitivity to hostility after advancing, he would have long been ambushed by the enemy. Undeserved had never been so infuriated before. He had agreed to chase after the humans, but the prey refused to let him go, leaving him in a dilemma. At the end of the day, the only one who could be as agile in the air as on the ground was Hacksword, who was known as the Sky Lord. With all his abilities, he could only rely on the Stone of Flight to dodge left and right. It was all Nasapel's fault. If he had allowed the Winged Beast army to fight the enemy head-on, how could he have been chased by the red iron bird in such an unbridled manner? What main attack force hidden in the sky? He made it sound as if he had seen it himself. Undeserved dodged another volley of shots from the witch as he angrily looked up, only to be taken aback. A gigantic pitch-black iron bird glided out of the pillar of smoke. Its body was thicker than the largest bogle beast, and there were 4 propulsion devices hanging under its wings. The other double-winged iron birds were not even worth mentioning compared to it. Without a doubt, this was the anomaly that Mask was referring to. He had actually guessed correctly. The other winged beast troops also noticed this as they chased after the new target according to the previous instructions. Although the humans attempted to stop them, in the face of the absolute disparity in numbers, they were only delaying for time. It was only a matter of time before they struck down the gigantic iron bird. Fine, you're right. Undeserved used a sigil to transmit. My troops have already found your so-called main offensive force. I believe it will be resolved very soon. However, Mask's voice did not seem to relax at all. What does it look like? Tell me quickly. Undeserved frowned, but he still spoke bluntly. It looks like a larger man-made iron bird. What about the bottom of its abdomen? Is there anything hanging on it? At this moment, the witch attacked again. There's really no end to it. Once the big one is destroyed, it will be your turn soon. After Undeserved dodged, he finally had the time to take a closer look. There's nothing beneath it. What are you trying to say? Nothing at all? Mask repeated in a rare occurrence. That's right. Undeserved said impatiently. Other than a huge crater, I don't see anything. Chapter 1478. Nasapel felt a chill run down his spine. It had seen the appearance of the iron birds when they swooped down to drop bombs. Since the first round of attacks came from a large piece of metal, then the larger iron birds that Wu Wang had discovered were completely compatible. Regardless of when humans had been able to build iron birds that big, at least their principles and structure should be the same. And the large crater in the abdomen meant that the enemy had dropped the second metal chunk. Then where is it now? As Nasapel steered King City to change directions, he raised his head to look at the top of the cloud pillar, but he quickly gave up on the pointless attempt. Without the help of the demon guards, it was impossible for him to find the answer in the chaotic sky with his half-blind eyes. Above him were traces of the battle between the iron bird and the winged beasts, and the falling black dots could be fragments of the iron bird, or the limbs of the bogle beasts, or even the primordial demons that had lost their mounts. In fact, he could not even see the gigantic black iron bird that Undeserved mentioned. The tumbling smoke and dust had already expanded to dozens of kilometers, forming a gigantic umbrella above his head. In between, it formed a discontinuous screen, so it was basically impossible for him to see the entire situation from a low vantage point. Did it leave anything behind? Or are there any black objects falling at high speeds nearby? Mask was practically roaring as he asked. Yes, they're everywhere. The other party's answer did not exceed his expectations. If you want me to look for something, it's best you describe it more clearly. It's too late, Nasapel realized. What else can I do? How can I avoid this attack? Many hypotheses emerged in his mind, but they were quickly extinguished. No, it still doesn't work. In the end, Mask realized that he was at his wit's end. Against the enemy's inconceivable legacy weapon, there was nothing he could do. The deity of gods was extremely massive, and it was impossible to change directions in a short period of time. Even though he had ordered the core instrument to retreat at full speed, the massive inertia continued to push the mountain forward slowly. Intercept the incoming iron chunk? Putting aside the fact that the exact location and speed of that thing were completely unknown, it was difficult to even give this command. The army of winged beasts had already spread out, and their first target was the giant iron bird. The birth tower's consciousness transmission could only be sensed by the higher ascendants who could touch the realm of mind. It had no way of informing the thousands of primal demons and junior demons of this impending threat. The only thing Mask could hope for was that those idiots with only one brain would be a little smarter and treat the human weapon as another kind of anomaly, instead of allowing this black metal block to smash into King City. From now on, the fate of the clan had nothing to do with individual will. Sylvie couldn't help but bite her lips. Smoke billowed from the siege of the Ark of Peace, and the nose of the Ark was dented by the enemy's impact. Even though the two engines were still spinning, it couldn't prevent the Ark from crashing. The Ark was surrounded by a dense horde of devil beasts. They closed in from all directions, throwing spears with explosive effects at the out-of-control plane. The scene reminded her of vultures dividing their prey. This was also the choice made by the crew. In order to minimize the error, the Ark of Peace descended from a height of 7,000 meters to a height of 4,000 meters. This distance was already less than the safety limit, and the calculated route would practically crash straight into the enemy's search area, at the same time coinciding with the height of the fatal radioactive dust column. It could be said that once the decision was made, there was no turning back. After receiving the corrected parameters and the results, Captain Eagleface didn't say much to her. He only said 2 sentences. Ark of Peace received. Thank you. I'll leave the rest of the mission to you. It was as if this was nothing out of the ordinary. If she hadn't informed him of the observed parameters, or chosen a safer route, Vendi suddenly pressed down on her hand, as if she could see that she couldn't bear to do this. This isn't your fault. Eagleface is well aware of his responsibilities, and he has accomplished his mission with flying colors. If not for the Ark of Peace attracting most of the enemy's attention, the Air Knight's losses would be incalculable. Get them to retreat from the explosion area and prepare for the impact. Sylvie knew that he was right. It wasn't easy for the Air Knight to last until now when the enemy had the absolute advantage in numbers. She couldn't let Eagleface's determination go to waste. Yes, she took a deep breath, pulled herself together, and sent the message through the sigil and the radio. Upon receiving the order, the aircrafts turned and used their speed to leave the battlefield. At this moment, Sylvie saw an incredible scene. Not all the Air Knight were retreating. 3 Fury of Heaven aircrafts not only had no intention of leaving, but were instead flying towards the demon's capital. Hey, do you know what you're doing? Finken's voice did not stop ringing in the earpiece. This isn't a drill. Of course I know. Good roared. As he spoke, he killed a devil beast that was charging at him with a clean burst shot. If everyone flies out, the enemy will definitely notice the bombs dropped by the Ark of Peace. Although it won't be easy to change its trajectory, who knows what will happen in the end? If you don't believe me, look at that guy. He's obviously thinking the same thing as me. The reason why Good insisted on staying in the initial airspace was because he was worried that the demons would notice the bombs dropped from high altitudes and prevent them from landing in the deity of gods. The second internal explosion bomb weighed 4 tons, and was embedded with God's stones of retaliation. Be it spears or magic stones, it would be difficult for it to be damaged. But the problem was that it could only be detonated in the core region of the floating city to achieve its best effect. This was a point that the battle plan had emphasized many times. It was impossible for the devil beasts to catch up to it, but it was better to be safe than sorry. If a demon happened to block its path, the outcome might be very different. And he was the guardian of the final route. Unfortunately, he was not the only one who had thought of this. Someone else had acted faster than him. Perhaps the moment the bomb left the cabin, the other party had already caught up with it. That person was Manfeld Castian. In fact, he had noticed Manfeld's car first, and only then did he find the round bomb in the chaos of his vision. The three Fury of Heaven aircrafts formed a triangular echelon and chased after the bomb. The roar of the engines seemed to penetrate his earmuffs, and Good could even see the stabilizer fins at the tail of the bomb. If it were the fire of heaven of the past, it would have long fallen apart from the high-speed flight. Thankfully, the process didn't take too long. After eliminating two devil beasts that attempted to approach, the gigantic hole in the dome of the deity of gods was right in front of them. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1479. Good gripped the control stick tightly and stared ahead without blinking. Time seemed to have slowed down. In the beginning, he could still hear the roar of the engine, but gradually, the sound was replaced by the thumping of a heartbeat. But not long after, even the sound of the heartbeat ceased to exist, and the world around him became exceptionally quiet. The bombs were slowly moving away from the fire of heaven, and the crack in the dome grew larger and larger, almost occupying half of his vision. At this point, many demons had already noticed them, but in the frozen time, even turning around was as slow as a snail. He could not help but recall the scene from the mission confirmation meeting before he set off. "Your Highness, is the bomb dropped by the bombing crew really that powerful? If I fly fast enough, I should be able to leave the impact behind me, right?" The person who asked this question was Finkian. Regardless of the occasion, his off-the-cuff remarks always caused everyone to laugh. To be honest, he was rather envious of him at times. "Unless you fly faster than light." The Princess Royal mercilessly refuted this thought. "The intense light produced when it explodes can directly roast you. By the time you see it, it will be too late to run. Even if you are lucky enough to avoid the light, the subsequent shock wave will exceed the speed of sound in a short period of time, so the only safe way to avoid it is to stay far away from it." She paused at this point. "At least the first one is like that. What about the second one? If the god of fortune is on your side, there might be other opportunities. But rather than praying to the heavens, can't you push the control stick and retreat ahead of time?" Amidst the laughter, Her Highness Tilly did not elaborate, but Good took it to heart. In fact, he could guess what the Princess Royal was referring to after seeing the first bomb explode. Just relying on the glory of the sun was insufficient to completely wipe out the deity of gods. This was also the reason why the plan emphasized on aiming at the core region of the Mist Lake. And when it exploded from within, the latter's massive body would become a natural cover. But Her Highness Princess Royal was wrong on one point. It was not entirely dependent on luck, but more dependent on one's teammates. If it were anyone else, Good would not have been so sure. And the captain of the Ark of Peace in charge of the second bomb was Eagle Face. He was a person who did not believe in luck. If he was an instructor, he would definitely fulfill his duty to the fullest. This was also the reason why Good was determined to escort them on their last journey. He didn't want the enemy's luck to ruin everything the instructor had done. "Hey Good, answer me. Are you daydreaming?" Suddenly, his companion's voice broke the stagnation of time. The sound of the wind and the roar of the engine once again rang in his ears. Mask simply shielded his brain that could sense magic power, causing the entire world to turn silent. At this moment, he was the birth tower itself, and this was also the most suitable location to experience the new human inheritance. The moment he saw the metal block, Nasapel opened, all his arms towards the sky. "Come, let me take a good look. The power of knowledge." Before he could finish his sentence, a dazzling light engulfed him. Following a thunderous boom, Good was shocked to see the black pyramid behind him suddenly expand. It was as though the outer shell was not made of stone, but some kind of soft liquid. The strong impact produced a clear ripple on the rock wall. When it spread to the apex, flames mixed with a large amount of smoke and dust gushed out from the crack, instantly surpassing the dust pillar produced by the first explosion. The upper layer of the pyramid completely disintegrated, and almost a third of the stones were sent into the sky. If he had been any slower, this explosion would have been enough to annihilate him. But this was only the beginning. Soon, the flames that spewed out turned into another color. The color was the same as fresh blood. The scale of its eruption quickly exceeded the smoke pillar, and dyed half the sky red. Good noticed that it was not a red mist, but a viscous stream of fire. At this moment, the deity of gods was like an erupting volcano, constantly spewing the accumulated lava into the sky. And when this stream of fire expanded to its limit, another even more shocking explosion rang out. The fog lake was ignited. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1480. Good swore that it was the most inconceivable scene he had ever seen in his life. If he had to describe it, it was like a volcano floating in the sky. And this volcano did not only have a single vent, but blossomed everywhere. After the earth-shattering explosion, not only was the upper dome blasted apart by the flames, the surrounding areas of the city also spewed out hundreds of dark red streams of flames. He could completely imagine the scene inside the deity of gods. Under the astonishing heat, the red mist transformed into balls of viscous flames that resembled ignited grease. This further raised the temperature of the air, causing the red mist to expand even further before finally bursting out from the holes and cracks in the ground. This meant that the demons had nowhere to escape. Even if they hid in a secret chamber that could withstand the high pressure and impact, they would still be roasted to death by the high temperature. It was definitely a scene from hell. Even though they were enemies, Good felt a tinge of sympathy for them. However, his own situation wasn't much better now. The short distance of a few dozen kilometers from the center of the deity of gods to the periphery was filled with danger. The chain reaction showed no signs of stopping. The streams of flames that were tens of meters tall were like sharp blades that were bound to be destroyed the moment they collided with them. If that was something that he could use his skills to resolve, then the rain of fire that fell from the sky was something that he could not control. The fragments that were initially ejected from the explosion were now in the stage of falling. They were either rocks in a semi-molten state or burning gelatinous objects. Good only needed to raise his head to see the dense cluster of flames above him. They seemed to cover the sky, and even the rays of dawn were suppressed. "Damn it! Did you see that thing in the sky?" Finken shouted from the other end. "Nonsense, I'm not blind. Its range is too exaggerated. We won't be able to fly out in this short amount of time. If we wait for it to fall, I think we won't be able to escape no matter how we run. No. Tisich, there's another place Tisich to avoid it." At this moment, a voice suddenly appeared in the channel. Obviously, it was Manfeld who had rushed ahead of them. Probably due to the fact that they had dispersed in different directions, there were obstacles in between them, causing his communication to be somewhat blurry. "Agreed, but the premise is that we can rush over in time," Good replied. "Wait, you can't be serious, right?" Finken quickly came to his senses. "This thing is about to crash. You want to take refuge in it?" He knew that his companion was right. In fact, when the second explosion occurred, Good already knew that His Majesty's plan had worked. The deity of gods was clearly collapsing bit by bit. Even though it was still hovering about 100 meters above the ground, this change undoubtedly meant that the magic power core controlling the floating city had been destroyed, and it was only a matter of time before it crashed. If they could fly to the base of the deity of gods before the rain of fire landed, they could avoid the fate of being implicated by the eruption. But considering the fact that the floating island was constantly falling, doing so was equally risky. If they didn't control their direction and speed well, they would either directly fall into the ground or crash into the black rock wall. Their outcome wouldn't be any better than being directly hit by the rain of fire, but at least the former did not have to leave it up to fate. At that moment, the plane finally leveled off. Good pushed the throttle to the maximum and rushed towards the edge of the deity of gods. On the Seagull, Sylvie witnessed the destruction of the Demon's King's city. Not only did the rapidly expanding red mist spurt out from the dome of the city, it also broke through the sluice gates at the bottom of the tower. The burning red mist transformed into a thick pillar of flame under high pressure. First, it engulfed the demons gathered below in an instant. Then, like a flamethrower, it scorched the ground, spreading over a radius of several kilometers. Following that was a rain of falling rocks. Most of them were wrapped in flames or completely red in color, as they fell to the ground in a continuous stream. The devil beasts protecting King's City were nearly wiped out. Regardless of which direction they fled in, they were unable to avoid the heavenly punishment. The Devil's Town, which was a distance away from King's City, was also severely affected. However, it was ultimately located at the edge of the eruption. Although the troops that retreated from the beginning were not unscathed, they were not completely wiped out. To them, the creation that was once viewed as a miracle had turned into a living city was a truly unbearable blow. At the very least, Sylvie saw many demons freeze in place as they watched the Blackrock Tower pressing down on them. After experiencing 2 explosions, the deity of gods fell into a state of complete paralysis. It dragged along the 2 eruptions of flames as it descended along its original path. After a quarter of an hour, the top of the giant pyramid was the first to make contact with the ground. The collision between the 2 resulted in a 3rd explosion, and the scorching heat wave formed a small shock wave. Under the influence of inertia, the floating island continued to slide forward, crushing the camp and outpost below it into dust. When it gradually came to a stop, a ditch that was thousands of meters wide was carved out behind it. The surging flames weakened at this moment, and the tumbling smoke and dust suppressed the flames to a certain extent. But that did not mean that it had calmed down. The interior of the deity of gods was like a boiling furnace. This could be seen from the red cracks on the surface. Perhaps the fire would burn for a few months before it was truly extinguished. Before that happened, the demons residing in the city would become its fuel. The only thing that Sylvie was concerned about was the 3 people that had charged into the deity of gods. "How is it? Did you see anything?" Her Highness Tilly inquired about their whereabouts. "No, not for the time being." She bit her lip and replied. The deity of gods had experienced overturning, falling, and sliding, so the risk of accompanying it was obvious. If they did not appear after a long time, the outcome would probably be disastrous. Wait. Suddenly, her magic eyes noticed a few inconspicuous black dots. They looked like gravel that had been swept up by the heat wave, but they had yet to land. Sylvie mustered the last of her magic power, and enlarged her vision. She saw 3 grayish-white biplanes charging out from the billowing smoke and dust. The emblems of a tower and a spear on their tail wings were extremely distinct. Even though the planes looked tattered, with a layer of dust on their wings and their skins no longer smooth and complete, at least the bodies were intact. She was momentarily speechless, as though something was stuck in her chest. After sniffing, Sylvie picked up the sigil and replied, "Your Highness, the 3 of them are fine." "Is that so?" Tilly's tone suddenly relaxed. "I knew it. If he really knew, he wouldn't keep asking." Andrea, who was at the side, secretly curled her lips. Chapter 1481. That's impossible. Blood Conqueror looked at the red sky and roared while clenching his battle axe. Although he could not see the exact situation of the deity of gods, be it the blood-colored storm that soared into the sky or the continuous explosions, it was clear that the situation was not optimistic. As one of the first senior lords in his race to ascend, it was his first time seeing a man-made fire rain. In his memory, only the natural disasters in the Blackstone region would cause such a phenomenon of heaven and earth resonating and flames connecting to the clouds. And when the magic power fluctuations were so strong that even the higher ascendants could sense it, the worst prediction was verified. It was no longer a ripple, but a dull thud that hammered into his heart. Only the death of the king could cause such a clear tremor. If he wanted to kill the king, he had to first attack the deity of gods, which meant that he had to fight against thousands of junior demons, more than 100,000 primal demons, and even more symbiotic demons. Blood Conqueror could not imagine how the humans did it. What's going on over there? What are Undeserved and Mask doing? Its anger had reached its peak. The 2 bastards had solemnly vowed to protect the deity of gods, but in less than an hour, the rear had fallen. If they were to appear in the camp, it would definitely chop them into two without hesitation. Wait, where are you going? Just as Blood Conqueror gritted his teeth and walked out of the camp, Death Scar stopped him. Is there a need to ask? To kill the enemy, of course. Get out of the way. How are you going to reach those metal lumps in the sky? The latter remained motionless. What's more, once the deity of gods is damaged, the birth tower here will be the only source of red mist in the vicinity. Those who are still alive will definitely retreat to Arietta at the first opportunity. Do you want to go against the tide of people? So what? I'll crush anyone who blocks me. Blood Conqueror spat fiercely. And then cause the morale of the migration team to hit rock bottom? Death Scar said solemnly. The fluctuations from before have already made the camp uneasy. If you leave alone now, I'm afraid they will think that you are scared out of your wits and escaped alone. If that happens, the order of the entire army will collapse. Bullshit. Blood Conqueror raged. Even when facing the Sky Sea Realm's army of 10 million, I did not take a step back. How dare you say I'm afraid? So what if you're not afraid? The key was the thoughts of the other ascendants. Even if the conjecture didn't match the facts, it could still make people believe it without a doubt in times of chaos and danger. Unfortunately, I'm afraid it's difficult for you to understand this point with your comprehension ability. A voice suddenly came from behind it. The Blood Conqueror's eyes widened. He would never forget the owner of the voice. It was the long-lost Sky Lord, Hacksword. Almost without hesitation, it raised its axe and turned around to chop down. The surging magic power exploded with a loud bang, creating a large pit several feet wide on the ground. Before the dust settled, Hacksword walked out from another distortion door. You traitor. The Blood Conqueror turned his head and growled. That's why I said that no matter how ridiculous the speculation is, no one will care about what the truth is. It said disapprovingly. I've never betrayed the tribe. Where have you been these past few months? Death Scar's expression was also very shocked. Although he wasn't as angry as the Blood Conqueror, he was also on guard. I went to the Bottomless Land, which is also the source of magic power that the tribe speaks of, the realm of mind. Hacksword replied word by word. What did you say? Death Scar was stunned. It's between the Land of Dawn and the Blackstone region, above the Misty Sea. The Sky Lord briefly recounted his experience and discovery. And the one who told me this news was the Nightmare Lord Valkyries. This series of shocking news left the two senior lords dumbfounded. It also caused the other tribesmen who had gathered after hearing the commotion to start whispering. A moment later, the Blood Conqueror reacted. So you betrayed the king together with it? This attack was also the result of your collusion with the humans? I know you can't understand. It's just like when you're blinded by anger and insist on taking revenge on the humans, but throw the interests of the tribe to the back of your mind. Hacksword turned to look at Death Scar. But you're different from the Blood Conqueror. You should understand the meaning behind these clues. In addition, although I've had contact with the humans, I didn't participate in their attack plan. The collusion is complete nonsense. Death Scar was silent for a moment before he spoke. Indeed, I'm not the Blood Conqueror, so tricks with words are meaningless to me. It's undeniable that your departure has indirectly weakened King City's defense. Even if you didn't participate, it can't be said that this attack has nothing to do with you. Sitting back and not doing anything is in itself helping the humans. Cut the crap. Blood Conqueror roared. Use your ability to control it. I want to tear it to pieces with my own hands. But Death Scar didn't take action. What I want to ask is, even at this stage, do you still believe that you're doing it for the tribe? I believe that such things are meaningless. Hacksword replied calmly. The truth is that the inheritance that the humans possess far exceeds our expectations. It's already impossible to completely defeat them. The final outcome will only be an internecine outcome. No one will be able to continue in the war of samsara. But from another perspective, if the battle of divine will isn't necessary, then perhaps both tribes can survive. Why does it have to be my tribe that gives in? This time, Skylord's voice carried a hint of regret. Because the one who can influence the gods is a human. Are you sure? If you had seen that fictional world, You wouldn't say that. Sky Lord sighed. According to the Nightmare Lord, the tribe once had the chance to reach this stage. Heathtiles, who created the Cloud Society, had heard the oracle's whispers. And back then, the humans were just a pile of loose sand. Deathscar stared at him for a long time, as though trying to determine if those words were sincere. Finally, he whispered, "Where does the Nightmare Lord want to lead the tribe? To pledge allegiance to the human you mentioned?" "No, we don't need to do anything. All we need to do is bring him to the bottomless land." "If that's the case." "Ridiculous." Blood Conqueror raised his foot and stomped on the ground, interrupting their conversation. "What's the difference between this and surrendering, leaving our fates to others? Believing in the promise of the worm? I think all of you are crazy. The Nightmare Lord is nothing more than this. This is the only opportunity. Ha 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 ha. You treat charity as an opportunity?" He raised his axe. "Hasn't the hundreds of years of fighting against the Sky Sea realm made you more courageous?" "Oh, I forgot. Indeed you haven't. After all, how can you encounter a truly powerful enemy if you hide in the back?" Hacksword's expression sank. "I was born for blood and slaughter, and this so-called fate can only be controlled by me." Blood Conqueror roared. "Lay down my weapons to the enemy and then beg for their kindness? No. I, Blood Conqueror, would rather die in battle than surrender to anyone. Although I knew the outcome would be like this, I still tried my best to avoid it." Hacksword raised his hand and snapped his fingers. A new distortion door slowly opened behind him. The one who walked out of the door was the expressionless Silent Disaster. Dark clouds surged in the sky. Chapter 1482. When the light of divine will dissipated, the sky that was shrouded in dark clouds regained its brightness. Tens of thousands of demons stood in the distance, silently witnessing the battle between the two senior lords. The original grassland had disappeared, replaced by scorched earth. Every divine will that descended seemed to contain unstoppable power. Rocks were smashed, trees were set ablaze, and everywhere they passed could be described as barren. But Blood Conqueror's massive body rampaged through the golden lightning, as though he did not care about the damage that divine will inflicted on him. It had also left countless marks on the ground. Those ravines that were as wide as a few people were the masterpiece of its immense strength that it was so proud of. But in the end, the latter was still the first to fall. Not only was Silent Disaster's attack powerful, it was also not inferior to undeserved speed. Every attack would leave a wound on Blood Conqueror's body. There was a limit to the consumption of magic power. Even a high-ranking Lord of Hell, that was known for its recovery ability, would eventually run out of magic power. When Silent Disaster brushed past Blood Conqueror and sliced off his thick hind leg with her sharp blade, the outcome was self-evident. "This isn't a fair battle," Deathscar said in a low voice. Blood Conqueror's ability was extremely similar to that of human extraordinaries. Most of his magic stones were used on his body, making him invincible on the battlefield. Be it metal weapons or magic power attacks, they had extremely strong resistance. Once he started charging, there were few things that could stop him. As for Silent Disaster, she was one of the best in terms of individual strength. Her Demon Slayer talent could strengthen the effects of her abilities, and her keen senses and body ensured that she could avoid those heavy and fatal attacks. The results of the two naturally could not be considered equal. "Not necessarily," Hacksword said. "Look. Cough cough. Cough." Blood Conqueror's body was covered in wounds, and blue blood flowed out like a mountain spring. Clearly, the injuries he suffered had far exceeded his self-healing ability. He leaned on his long axe and forcefully supported his upper body, and there was an inexplicable joy on his face. "Not bad, as expected of a genius with the name of Sharida. I've wanted to fight you for a long time, to see who's, cough, the bravest warrior of the race." Silent Disaster wasn't unscathed either. There were many dents on her armor, and one of her arms was completely broken, dangling by her side. If I hadn't experienced a near-death battle recently, the outcome of this battle might not have been certain. "This is the joy of fighting, isn't it?" Blood Conqueror coughed up a mouthful of blood. "Compared with surrendering, this is more suitable for me." Silent Disaster took a deep breath, wielding her sword with one hand as she walked towards the other party. Ahem. One last question. Are you going to use the fate of your race as a reason to surrender to the humans like those trash? No, I'm only doing this for Valkyries. With that said, Silent Disaster slashed down with her sword, stabbing Bloodthirsty's chest. The ripples of magic power swept across the realm of mind once more. No one dared to stop him, and no one was willing to stop him. It was as if this outcome had been tacitly agreed upon since the beginning of the battle. What should we do next? Deathscar frowned and remained silent for a long while before speaking. The mother of soul that needs to be transplanted are all on the deity of gods. Currently, there are only 3 birth towers that can produce red mist. Furthermore, the stronghold closest to the north will fall into the hands of the Sky Sea realm sooner or later. Once Arietta and your Sky City fall, we will have nowhere to retreat to. There are many things that need to be done. Hacksword sighed. You have to settle down the large number of troops that are retreating from the rear, and then establish a supply line between the 2 cities. The Legacy Shard has to be firmly controlled by the race, and be as far away from the humans and the Sky Sea realm as possible. In addition, the race needs a new king to ensure the continuation of the future generations. He paused. Of course, the first thing to do is to negotiate with the humans. I hope that Valkyries didn't choose the wrong direction. He turned and walked towards the camp. His people surged and opened up a path. Skylord looked towards the blood-colored dawn in the east and didn't reply. Roland had long walked into the airfield when he learned that the aircrafts were about to land. In fact, he wasn't the only one. The 1st Army engineering team, logistics personnel. Everyone ran to the ground, waiting for the moment the aerial knight would return. When the first biplane landed on the floating island's runway, the crowd erupted into deafening cheers. After waiting for a long time, Roland finally saw the Seagull and the Phoenix. Compared to the glider that had not changed much when they set off, the latter appeared much more modeled. But its posture was still as stable as before. Very quickly, the 2 aircrafts landed in front of him. Without waiting for the escalator to be erected, he took large strides towards the runway. Wait. Tilly reached out her hand to stop him after landing. Don't come over. Why? Didn't you say that the explosion would produce a dangerous contamination? Although the Phoenix is far from the target, there's no guarantee that it won't be contaminated. Now that I've touched it, if you come over. Before Tilly could finish her sentence, she was pulled into Roland's embrace. Who cares about it? He said with a smile. The crowd quickly noticed this scene, and more people rushed to the airfield, opening their arms to embrace the returning aerial knight. Finally, they lifted them up and threw them into the air. The airfield immediately turned into a sea of jubilation. Didn't you say that when they return, they will first undergo disinfection and inspection? Nightingale curled her lips. Anna shook her head in amusement. This time you've set a bad precedent. Seems like it. Roland could not help but facepalm. Phew. At this moment, lightning descended from the sky and pounced on him. We did it. Coup. We won coup. Following closely behind was Maggie. The other witches also came forward. Aren't you going to stop everyone? Nightingale shrugged. Tilly pondered for a moment, then laughed. Who cares? After a long period of commotion, the airfield returned to normal. According to Aerial Knight's report, the logistics department split the returning airplanes into several batches and determined the degree of disinfection based on the distance from the explosion. As for the fire of heaven that Good and the rest piloted, they immediately abandoned it because it was too close to the deity of gods. The upper echelons of the First Army quickly obtained the final tally. A total of 146 airplanes returned safely, with most of them being the older generation Fire of Heaven. This also meant that Neverwinter had lost nearly a third of its air power. It was obvious that the number of senior demons guarding King's City was on a completely different level from the Western Front Army. If they had used conventional methods, it would have been difficult to end the war in a short period of time. Of the other 2 bombers, only the Kuanpeng returned safely. When Sylvie said Eagle Face's last words, there was a momentary silence in the conference room. Grey Castle will not forget them. Roland said solemnly. When we return to Neverwinter, I will make sure everyone remembers their names, be it the sacrifices or the surviving warriors. But before we celebrate, we have to ensure that Ariel Knight's health is fine. Your Majesty, rest assured, the logistics department has already made the necessary preparations, Ironax replied. These were all part of the contingency plan, which included tracking and observation, as well as isolation and treatment for the exposed, etc. For Hero, who possessed the ability to transfer diseases, and Nana, who had the perfect removal method, the radiation sickness was not without countermeasures. Even though the process would be long and costly, Roland did not plan on giving up on anyone. Of course, before that, I will allow everyone to have a small celebration tonight. He relaxed his tone and smiled. For this hard-won victory. Chapter 1483. Cheers, Agatha said as she raised her glass. Cheers. The witches responded with a loud roar. Dozens of glasses were raised into the air and clinked together. Among them were the tequila people who had lost their sense of taste, as well as the higher-ups of the Union who had become carriers. This was especially so for the latter two, for those who had experienced the last battle of divine will and suffered great despair and helplessness. At this moment, they could finally put down the heaviest stone in their hearts. They could laugh heartily with everyone, and their smiles were even more radiant than the others. Not all sacrifices would be rewarded, and not all perseverance could wait until dawn. Because of this, when hundreds of years of sacrifice and perseverance were not in vain, it was even more touching. Well, Nana looked curiously at Pasha and the others and said, "Can you really taste it by drinking like this?" The gods' punishment witches had only lost their sense of taste, but Pasha, Aletheia, and Celine's drinking method was completely beyond everyone's imagination. They curled up their tentacles and poured the wine over their heads, as if they were taking a bath. Of course, although we don't have mouths, we can use the short tentacles on the surface to distinguish tastes and absorb water. And our senses are far stronger than ordinary people, Pasha replied with a smile. In addition, the carrier's sense of taste is different from that of humans, so we can taste things we've never experienced before. Wow! What's that taste? Wow! What's that taste? I want to know. Lightning's eyes lit up. According to the research of the Quest Society, people can't understand things they've never encountered, so even if she told you, it would be hard for you to imagine. The ice witch refilled her glass. If you want to go beyond this limit, the only way is to become a carrier. Agatha, do you want to? Celine was a little surprised. Yes, when all this is over, I want to transfer my soul and rebuild the Quest Society. Agatha nodded calmly. A witch's lifespan is only 100 years. If I can become a carrier, I can continue my research. Then she smiled at Lightning and said, "People like you who are curious about the unknown are the most suitable for the Quest Society. How about it, are you interested in joining us?" But if I become a carrier, I won't be able to fly, right? Lightning thought for a moment. I haven't even finished exploring this world. When the day comes that I can no longer fly, maybe I'll consider it. Phew. What are you thinking? You make it sound like the battle of divine will is over. Lorgar heaved a sigh of relief after finishing a large glass of wine. We've only just defeated the demons. There are more powerful enemies on the other side of the continent. No one can guarantee that the war will end once we reach the bottomless land. Therefore, all we need to do today is drink to our heart's content in celebration. As she spoke, she touched the wine barrel beside her. It seems to be empty. Where's the new wine? Let's drink slowly, everyone. Evelyn has to make too much wine today. Molly commanded the magic servants to remove the empty wine barrels. After all, the entire floating island is celebrating tonight. Even if she tried her best, she wouldn't be able to make it. Whether it was the chaos drinks or the wine, they were all goods of enjoyment. Naturally, it was impossible to waste precious manpower to transport them before the departure. Therefore, the simplest way was to bring Evelyn along. As long as there was water, it could produce wine continuously. However, when everyone was celebrating their victory, These reserves were not enough. Uffed. Anna, who was sitting at the head of the table, suddenly laughed. What's the matter? Everyone cast their gazes at her. No. Nothing. I just thought of something interesting. Anna shook her head. Roland used to say that he didn't understand why those simulations of civilization evolution would place so much importance on wine. Even if there was a lack of food and clothing, as long as there was some wine, happiness and satisfaction would rise. And if there was only food and clothing, he would still create trouble. It's simply unreasonable. Now, from the looks of it, it's not completely unreasonable. Here we go again. Big Brother's weird words. Tilly rolled her eyes. Everyone burst into laughter. By the way, isn't His Majesty done with his work? It shouldn't be a problem for him to temporarily put aside his work for a while, right? Vendi asked. Roland only attended the celebration at the very beginning. After giving a short opening speech to the entire island, he returned to his office. According to him, the demons would soon come knocking on his door. He had to first settle the matters at hand to have a general grasp of the upcoming plan. After he was done with these matters, he would come up to celebrate with everyone. I'll rush him, Anna said as she stood up. Then I'll leave it to you, Vendi said with a smile. The cave where the witches were celebrating wasn't far from where Roland was. After passing through a long and narrow passageway, she arrived at the office beneath the command post. In fact, it wasn't only Roland who was busy. There were incessant footsteps coming from the command post and the general staff's corridor. Clearly, they knew that the journey to the bottomless land was the most crucial part of the entire plan. Of course, her visit to Roland wasn't entirely to let him relax. Nightingale was by his side at that moment, and she had promised that the appointed time would be after the battle. With this in mind, Anna knocked on the door. Come in, the door isn't locked. The person who answered her was Nightingale. Upon seeing Anna, she was clearly surprised, and even her expression turned unnatural. Oh, why are you here? Of course it's for the appointment. Just now? Wait. I'm not prepared yet. Anna revealed a rare crafty smile. I lied to you. I only got him to drink at everyone's request. So that's how it is. Nightingale heaved a sigh of relief, but she also felt a sense of loss. But the appointment is also a part of it. There's no harm in saying it all at once. Anna looked at the sleeping Roland, who was slumped over the table. Is he still in the dream world? Nightingale took a while to realize that Anna was doing it on purpose. She could only say helplessly, yes, he said he needs to check on the research progress of the Grey Castle Design Bureau's new project. He also needs to discuss the follow-up matters with that senior lord. He'll be back soon. If you wish to wake him up, just nudge him. According to him, these matters can be interrupted at any time. After all, the time won't change. Anna nodded and gently nudged Roland. The latter didn't react. Strange, I should have been able to wake him up like this in the past. Could it be that he's too tired from preparing for the plan these days? Nightingale pressed on Roland's shoulder and shook him back and forth, but she still couldn't wake him up. She tried to use more strength to push his body up, but he fell backward without any reaction until he leaned against the back of the chair. His hands slid down weakly and hung by his waist, as if he had completely lost consciousness. Both of their expressions instantly changed. You're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.